INFP wiring of the mind. Hey, it's Joe Markowitz for Personality Hacker. As an INFP, your mind is fundamentally wired differently from other personalities. You've probably already heard that you're an introvert, intuitive, feeler, perceiver. And a lot of articles and resources focus on the behaviors you show the world as an INFP. Behavior can be helpful, but it isn't the complete picture when figuring out your personality. I want to give you a peek inside your mind to expose the mental wiring that makes you an INFP. So let's get started. Your four-letter code, INFP, gives us insight into how your mind is learning information and making decisions. The primary way your mind makes decisions is a mental process we've nicknamed authenticity. Its technical name is introverted feeling. When evaluating any decision, authenticity asks the question, does this feel right? It's a feeling process concerned with core values, motivation, and conviction. Now imagine a four-passenger car. If one of your mental processes could drive, it would be authenticity. Using this mental process puts you in flow. You've been using it your whole life. It's how you decide what to do each day. If authenticity is how you make decisions as an INFP, then the mental process we've nicknamed exploration is how you learn new information. The technical name for exploration is extroverted intuition. When looking at the world, exploration asks the question, what if? What if time is relative? What if everyone was forced to hug each other instead of handshakes? What if numbers had gender assignment? What gender would you assign to the number 8? Think about that four-passenger car again. If authenticity is in your driver's seat, then exploration is in the front passenger seat. It's your co-pilot mental process and what we call your growth state. Of course, this is a four-passenger car, so you also have two mental processes in the back seat. Sitting right behind the co-pilot is a mental process we call memory. Memory is all about precedent, safety, doing the reliable thing. It's about realizing who you are based on your past and your ties to the past. This mental process has the development of about a 10-year-old child. Finally, behind the driver of authenticity sits a mental process called effectiveness. We call this your blind spot or 3-year-old mental process. Effectiveness is a thinking process and asks the question, what works? Or what gets the job done without regard to anyone's personal feelings? Now, I want you to notice that we haven't talked about INFP behaviors. Instead, I've been talking about the mental wiring of your mind. Behaviors can only give us clues into how your mind is wired. It's far more interesting to dive into what causes our behaviors as people. And here at Personality Hacker, we don't talk about personality types for their own sake. We think understanding your personality is one of the best ways to frame your personal growth journey. And we attract a lot of INFPs who are interested in personal growth. Next up, I want to talk about the best way to grow yourself as an INFP. Remember the car model we used to show the mental wiring of your personality? As an INFP, your co-pilot is the mental process called exploration. Its technical name is extroverted intuition. This is what we call your growth position. It's the highest leverage point for growth in your personality. Exploration allows you as an INFP to test your convictions and core values in real-life situations. Are they authentic to you? Do you have an unrealistic expectation for the outer world? Is there a piece of awareness that you're missing? Sometimes the only way to experience your own myopia is to get out into the world and see for yourself. Exploration helps you get clear on what's true for both yourself and the outside world. Instead of being seen by others as having your head in the clouds, you end up looking inspirational to other people. There may even be a radically new way of experiencing a point of view, leading you to an awesome new innovation. Now, growing your exploration can be a challenge. Every personality type tends to avoid growing their co-pilot mental process. But here lies the power of understanding your personality. It feels right to focus on something that can expand your experience of the world. It feels like it's in alignment, that to feel more authentic, you'll need to continue expanding the experiences and information that you work with as an INFP. It should feel in alignment that to continue doing the right things, You'll need to get outside yourself and experience the world for what it is, not for what you wish it was. Only then can you discover what truly matters to you on a core level. As an INFP, your exploration process can help you refine what's right for you. So don't ignore this advantage of increasing your awareness in the outside world. Start asking what-if questions. Start pushing buttons all around you just to see what happens. Explore a new part of town. Get up on a Saturday and just start walking with no agenda. Just let yourself ramble. Try a new food each time you go out. Join an improv class. Do what it takes to start messing with the environment around you. As an INFP, you will bring the best version of yourself to the world when you get outside your comfort zone and explore every aspect of life. Developing exploration makes you as an INFP grounded and approachable. We would love for you to keep us up to date about your journey. One of the best places to do that is on our Facebook page, facebook.com/personality hacker. And of course, come over to personalityhacker.com and leave a comment, ask a question, or take our personality test. Next, I want to talk about the defensive strategies your mind uses to steal happiness from you as an INFP. And of course, what to do about it. The word defensive, you probably think of an emotional state, or maybe someone getting offended in the moment. She's acting so defensive, someone might say. But I'm not talking about emotions. I'm using the word positionally. As an INFP, you have a specific area of your mind that you defend. As an INFP, that's your memory process sitting in the backseat of your car. Remember, it has the sophistication of a 10-year-old child. And that's okay when you use this process to create intimacy or playfulness. The trouble starts when you begin to rely on this 10-year-old process to convince yourself of core values you haven't actually tested in the real world. Since memory is concerned with precedent and what came before, it can actually stop you from expanding your worldview and the experiences you take in. Memory, remember its technical name is introverted sensing, generally shows up when you're afraid to take a risk you may intuitively know is right for you. For other people, playing it safe is the best choice. But as an INFP, you're much better at taking risks. If you let your 10-year-old process of memory do your thinking for you, it will encourage you to become an experiential shut-in, closed to any new experiences, and your convictions will become unrealistic. At worst, INFPs can become physical shut-ins, so afraid of taking risks they rarely leave the house, and instead choose to entertain themselves in a safe environment. You need to explore and take chances to prevent becoming stagnant in your choices and worldview. Don't let your memory process steal your happiness. The solution is to focus on growing your exploration process like we've talked about before. Now I want to hear from you. How are you letting your 10-year-old process of memory hijack your happiness? What are the ways you as an INFP are playing it safe? You can leave a comment or take our personality test over at personalityhacker.com. And next, we'll talk about how you best show and receive love as an INFP. I've got 2 quick lists for you today. First, how INFPs ask, "Do you love me?" Second, how INFPs show other people love. Here are a few examples of how INFPs ask, "Do you love me?" Now just imagine an INFP asking these questions. Do you think I'm being real with you? Do you trust my motives and my intent? Will you support me no matter what? Do you have my back? Will you give me space to be me? Now here's some examples of INFPs saying, "Yes, I love you." Imagine an INFP making these statements. "I will be patient with your honest expressions. I will honor your feelings and identity, even if it's a struggle for both of us. I will hold space for you and give you alone time when you need it. I will have your back no matter what the fight is. I will trust that you have my best interest at heart." As an INFP, you're probably nodding in agreement. Just remember that other personalities can sometimes see these ways you show love passive or self-absorbed. Feel free to share with people in your life how your mind works. Let them know the ways you show love are authentic to you. If you want to go deeper in your personal development, we have tons of resources, articles, and recordings about personal development through the lens of understanding your personality. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Next up, let's talk about where to go next in your personal growth journey as an INFP. I have some action steps for you. We've been talking about you, the INFP personality type. I've already detailed the mental wiring of your mind. We've talked about your highest leverage point for growth and shed light on your defensive strategies. And we've outlined how you give and receive love. So what's next for you as an INFP? How will you launch yourself on a personal development journey that resonates with you? Understanding that each of us have a unique personal growth path seems obvious. And yet, self-help authors and teachers often teach a one-size-fits-all model of growth. Here at Personality Hacker, it feels right that personal growth will be personalized to you as an INFP. So that's how we designed our frameworks and models. You now know the mental process to grow yourself as an INFP is exploration. The enemy of exploration is the mundane and the rote. Exploration requires freedom to experiment, and too much mundane activity or reliance upon procedure is disheartening to your exploration process. Set up your conditions to access this mental process as much as possible. A good way to practice this technique is to seek out new situations you would normally avoid. If there's a question of doing something that feels right to you, but may have hassle or an unsafe element to it, practice taking the risk instead of playing it safe. It's common for INFPs, once they get past the scary part, to say, really, was that it? Most of your growth happens by being adventurous and letting go of the belief that you must live the way others want you to live. If you really want to deep dive into your individual growth plan as an INFP, I invite you to check out our INFP Personal Development Starter Kit. You can find more information at personalityhacker.com. And let me know what personal growth actions you're taking in your life and what has already worked for you. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Joe Markwitt for Personality Hacker. Talk with you soon. Hi, welcome to this week's edition of PHQ, questions from the Personality Hacker community. My name is Joe Markwitt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And Addison, let's get right to our question today.
Hello, my name is Rebecca, and I had a question concerning INFJs. I figured out I was an INFJ type last year after being mistyped by my well-meaning friends. At this point, I am pretty confident I am an INFJ, but something that seems odd to me is this. I've heard countless times, even from you guys, that this is one of the rarest personality types, and because of that, I'm almost surprised by how many INFJs I hear about, both on your podcast and on different websites. It just seems like a surprising amount of INFJs for something that is so rare. My two theories were that one, because it's such a rare type, people want to claim it as their own because they want to be seen as unique. Or two, I know that INFJs often really enjoy the Myers-Briggs system, so perhaps all of them just come out of the woodwork when they find a community, especially online, which is great. My concern is, if my first theory is correct, then could the meaning of being an INFJ be muddied or corrupted? I'm not trying to be all, this is my personality type and you can't have it. I just get concerned when I see something that says, you know you're an INFJ when, ... usually followed by something that has nothing to do with being an INFJ, perhaps causing confusion for those who truly are INFJs. I hope this makes sense. But can you imagine what it would feel like to have someone take your personality type and twist it into something else and then claim this to be the correct way? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this soon. I really enjoyed your website and podcast and think you guys are doing life-changing work. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca, for the question.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good question.
A lot of INFJs have this question.
A lot of people into typology have this question. If INFJs are so rare, why
I have this question.
Yeah, why are there so many of them?
Yeah.
I think, well, your question actually branches out to like 5 different sub-questions, which is, if there's so few INFJs, why are there so many of them? Is it that people are claiming INFJ status for themselves and they actually aren't? Is it that the numbers might be off? Like, there's lots of different possibilities in here. And I want to make the caveats before we start answering this, that a lot of this is going to be opinion and observation and anecdotal. It's not going to be like, well, here's the numbers and we have objective information on this. the reason why there is a discrepancy between the data and observation is that there isn't a lot of really solid demographic breakdown information on Myers-Briggs in general. Most of the different studies that have been done, the different demographic and statistical breakdowns of type that have been done are a little, they're not loosey-goosey, but they're not as rigorous as a lot of statistical analysis likes to be. And one of the reasons is that this is a soft science. So everything around personality psychology and typology is gonna be a little squishy. And that includes data. So a part of this is that there's nothing that's really solid, really strong statistical information around the topic in and of itself. And that said, it does seem to bear out that whenever statistical analysis is done around typology, as squishy as that might be, it appears as if INFJs are the least common. So this can be a number of different reasons. It can be that the numbers themselves are wrong, and it just happens to be that whoever is doing these, the stats, whoever is doing these breakdowns, these demographic breakdowns, are maybe just not pulling from a diverse enough sample size. That's a possibility. Another possibility is, that's the first possibility is that the numbers are wrong, okay? All the other possibilities are making the assumptions that the numbers are right, and also let's pretend the numbers are right, and here are reasons why there might be discrepancy between the numbers and what we experience in reality, or in our day-to-day interactions. INFJs, like the other introvert intuitive types, and I'm not saying introverted intuition as in the perspectives process, I'm talking about people who are introverts and intuitives, and the dichotomies. They have a tendency to feel more disenfranchised than other types. They have a tendency to be seeking this kind of information out, and they have a tendency to pull around these topics online, because the online world is a safe haven. So I think once the internet was invented, and forums and groups and Facebook groups and Myers-Briggs communities and communities around type and, basically a platform to be able to discuss this, all of a sudden our observations of how many people of each personality type got massively skewed based on this platform being particularly attractive to certain personality types. I remember I used to, way back, we're talking like 6 or 7 years ago, I used to moderate different Myers-Briggs forums back when forums were a thing, right? Pre the explosion of Facebook and everything has gone to Facebook groups. This was when forums were still strong. And I used to moderate certain forums. And I moderated the ENTP forum, or one of the ENTP forums online for a while. And it was like the easiest thing to moderate ever because nobody ever really showed up. There was maybe 20, 30 people that were active. And of those people, there was quite a few people who I suspected were not actually ENTPs. And then I remember an ENTJ forum, which literally had 5 to 10 members on it. And we're talking this was the ENTJ forum online at the time. The only one, really. And there was 10 people, and they posted once every couple months. And then I remember there were 2 competing, massively active INTP forums. And there was this insanely active INFJ forum, and an insanely active INTJ forum, and an insanely active INFP forum. So all the intuitive introvert forums were just ridiculously active. And if I'm not mistaken, they're all still in existence. I didn't moderate any of those, but I just remember being a part of those. And I remember them, there was no issue with those being active forums. So already we're talking about a platform that attracts certain types over other types. And you're going to see a disproportionately higher percentage of certain types online engaging with each other than other types. And that's not to indicate that there are more INFJs in the world than ENTJs. It's to indicate that INFJs are far more interested in interacting with each other on online forums than ENTJs are.
Yeah, we just did 2 different weeks surveys. We sent out an INFJ survey recently and an ENFJ survey. Within hours of sending out the INFJ survey, we had 200, 300 responses, right? And we sent out the ENFJ survey, and within a couple hours, we only had maybe 24 responses. So I think just INFJs in general are showing up because they want their voice to be heard about these topics. They're very interested in the questions, and a lot of ENFJs and other types will be like, hey, why don't you do more content around what we struggle with? And we're getting all of that. But one of the things we found is that INFJs in particular are devouring the type of things that we talk about intuition, about understanding how they're not broken, they're just INFJs that are making their way in a world that is not sensitive to them as people. And I think because INFJs have to deal with a lot of that psychic and emotional pain from other people, they're assaulted sometimes in social situations emotionally, they feel that way at least, that I think they're looking for solutions, they're looking for answers around some of these typology questions. So I think you're right, the numbers could be wrong, and I think your next point was going to be that, that we just attract a lot of them as well. I think I just hijacked the road you were on that.
No, not at all. I mean, it supports where I was going with that. We end up attracting a lot of INFJs and INFPs and INTJs and INTPs. One of the reasons why we started doing this weekly focus on different types, and some of the feedback from some INFJs this week are like, hey, could you do another long-form podcast around INFJs? And one of the reasons why we're focusing on different types per week is we noticed we are responding to our community's requests for content, and a lot of that's been INFJ requests. So we end up having a disproportionately high amount of INFJ content other than, other types of content. So we're now putting our attention to some other types too. So yes, there are more INFJs that are into this kind of thing, so you're going to see a higher number. The second question is, are other types believing they're INFJs? And is that, sort of diluting the content and information or the accuracy around what INFJs look like? And the answer to whether or not other types are claiming the INFJ type as their own is, I would say, also a component to the system of seeing a disproportionately high number of INFJs than what are supposed to be statistically present. And one of my guesses on this one is that, there are things that INFJs experience that are not peculiar just to them. There are other types that are highly sensitive. There are other types that have a bit of that ESP thing going on. There are other types that have a tendency to absorb other people's emotions to some extent. They don't have it at the level that an INFJ has it, but they have some of it. And most of the profiles and the descriptions around INFJs, because INFJs experience it so much more acutely than other types, is that's where descriptions tend to go for INFJs. And because it's not as powerful a phenomenon for other types, it's present, but it's not defining necessarily, then other types that also experience these things, being highly sensitive, absorbing other people's emotions, they resonate with that piece and they go, oh, I do that. I must be an INFJ because my maybe ENFJ profile didn't touch on this aspect. And it's because for an ENFJ, it's not quite the same level of defining as it is for an INFJ. So there are types that see that portion of an INFJ, description, and they resonate with that. And then they go, oh, that must be me too. I mean, I'm an ENTP. I am not a highly sensitive person. I have a bit of auditory sensitivity based on some trauma that my ears experienced when I was a child. So I have auditory sensitivity, but I'm not highly sensitive in any other way. However, when it comes to my relationship with you, Joel, my Harmony 10-year-old, what could be called my FE tertiary or extroverted feeling tertiary, we call it the Harmony 10-year-old in the car model. When Joel's experiencing the emotion, I'm experiencing that emotion because I'm so massively connected to you. And so, yeah, I'm absorbing your emotions, but that is a very specific thing for me. It's in the context of our relationship. It is only because you and I are so intimately connected. But I don't experience it with strangers, like on a bus, right? Like if a stranger's at the back of the bus, I'm at the front, and they're experiencing something strong. The only way that I would know that is through physical, basically body language. So there are components of this that other types resonate with, but they don't understand the levels that an INFJ experiences it. So they see these descriptions, they attach to them, they resonate with it, and then they adopt INFJ as their type. I think that's pretty common. So yeah, that does happen. And then of course when somebody, co-opts a type and then now projects all of their behaviors onto the type because they say INFJs, fill in the blank, and what they're actually saying is I fill in the blank, then there's going to be a certain amount of inaccuracy in type description. And one of the things that we've done to account for that is that we don't really like talking about type descriptions that much. It's not that interesting to us. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and I think it does help people understand that they're not alone in the world. But that's one of the reasons why we focus so much on cognitive functions. Because cognitive functions talk about the wiring of your mind, and anything can be written upon that wiring. It doesn't have to be a predictable, specific trend of behavior. It can be a lot of different trends of behaviors, but the wiring stays the same. So for those people who are still confused about type, usually when you introduce this concept of cognitive functions, we get so much feedback that somebody's like, well, I thought I was an INFJ, and then I went and read your, I listened to your podcast on INFJs, and now I'm not sure if I'm an INFJ or an INFP, and they're like almost irritated that they're now confused around it. And the reason why is because for the first time ever, they're thinking about the wiring, they're thinking about cognitive functions. So if you've got some confusion around type, go to the cognitive functions and really figure out which wiring is resonating with you, which of these mental patterns is resonating with you, because the behaviors are kind of a mixed bag. The behaviors, like two different types can have the exact same behavior styles for completely different reasons. And that's what happens with like INTPs and INTJs, or ENTPs and ENTJs, or whatever. Like there's lots of types that respond and are like, basically their behavior is the same, but it's for completely different reasons. So yeah, I mean the answer is like there's lots of different reasons why the INFJ numbers can feel weird. It is possible that the numbers are skewed. It is possible that INFJs are not the most rare type. That is a possibility. We don't know that to be true. All signs point to them being the most rare, but we don't know that for a fact. And then let's pretend that they are the most rare. There's lots of reasons why you might be seeing a lot of them online represented. And then yeah, there could be a lot of co-opting of that type by other types for very understandable reasons. But that said, a big part of what we try to do is we try to infuse a level of accuracy to these type descriptions. We're trying to get a movement going where people can rest into being intuitive, not necessarily a specific type of intuition, although that informs your growth and your growth pattern. But it's more about giving yourself permission to be you. And a part of, I kind of have a philosophy, and I don't know if this is your shared philosophy, Joel, but I have a philosophy that it's kind of okay if people think they're the wrong type. If it's giving them a sense of permission, if it's giving them a sense of resting into their identity, and it's giving them basically a way to not have to care what the rest of the world thinks about them, and that's the beginning of their growth process, I'm totally down with that. Now, it's less helpful later on if they're using their type to inform what kind of personal development they want to pursue. That's where you want to have a higher level of accuracy. But if you're just at that base level, if you just discover typology, this is the first time you've ever read a type description, and you're like, oh dude, that's totally me, and it totally isn't, that's okay. Because that's your first point of entry to loving yourself and accepting yourself and going, oh, I might be like other people, I'm not a complete and utter freak, or I'm not broken. If that's the result they get at that base level, I'm all for that.
Yeah, we're not doing this for type itself. People don't serve typology. Typology serves people. This is a system that we use as people. It's a tool set. And your mileage is going to vary, and your usefulness is going to vary. And the point of all of this, and the whole point of why we started Personality Hacker, and why we do this, is to help people and ourselves grow as a community together. And we focus in on intuitives, we focus in on all sorts of personality types, not just intuitives, but that's our main focus. And, if you are an INFJ listening, and you're noticing a lot of other INFJs in this community, that's a good thing. You get to be around people who are like mind, can help sharpen your mind, can help sharpen your heart, can help make this journey more accessible to you, because there might be people that have gone through something you're going through and have some answers that you can learn from right in this community here at Personality Hacker.
One more thing I want to mention, which is a phenomenon I see a lot in MBTI typology circles, and that is getting pissed off at anybody who claims to be a rare type that another person suspects they're not. There's a lot of name calling. I've seen graphics of like INFPs that pretend quote unquote that they're INFJs, and they're like fake unicorns, and they've got there's like a picture of a model with like a shoe on her head with like the heel of the shoe is going up in a unicorn position, and it's like INFPs fake unicorns. And I really kind of find all of that to be a response and reaction to one's own crippling insecurity. the insecurity that, look, I finally found something that's unique and special about me, and I want to keep it for myself. I don't want to share it. There's scarcity in specialness. There's scarcity around a type. And I don't want anybody who's not of my type to claim it because I'm rare and beautiful and a unicorn and nobody else gets to state that. And I feel like that is a misapplication of typology. Yeah, there are some of us that are pretty disenfranchised. And there are some of us that really have a tough road of accepting ourselves and recognizing that we're not broken and recognizing that there's something that's really valuable to others, that we can give value. That's such a massive aha moment. But to take that and then use it only to feed the ego or fuel the ego, to say I'm special and I don't really want anybody else who's not special like me to claim specialness in the particular way that I'm claiming specialness. I think that that's something that is I think it's really weaponizing a very powerful tool. I would really recommend people reconsider, if that's the direction they're going, reconsider how they're utilizing this hammer, right? As opposed to bludgeoning other people, maybe try to use it for building. Use this tool as a way to understand the self and to grow and not have to feel the ego, but to actually be able to transcend the ego. One of the reasons why we have such difficulty transcending our egos is because our egos are filled with so much pain, it makes us myopic and unable to get past it. What typology can do is it can help you understand who you are and heal some of those traumas, heal some of those wounds. So now you're not so married to just looking at yourself, your identity, your type, and your ego. Part of the reason why we do what we do as well is to get people to be self-accepting enough to stop thinking about themselves all the time, right? Like, get past your stuff, get past your ego, get past your trauma. Get to a point where if somebody claims to be your type, you're totally okay with that because that doesn't have anything to do with you. What you're here for is to understand yourself fully and to give back in whatever way that you can. So graduate from the phase of self-understanding, graduate to a point of full self-acceptance, and then transcending the need to always be licking your wounds or always be thinking of this in terms of scarcity. Get to a point where you understand that specialness is abundant. We're all special. It's totally okay if somebody has a slightly inaccurate perspective on their identity in terms of typology. Get to a point where if it's serving them, then you're happy for them. You're happy that it's serving them. And encourage people to continue to transcend their egos. Encourage people to get to a point where they're in such full self-acceptance that they don't have to constantly be self-referencing. That they can start looking outside themselves and going, okay, now what can I offer the world?
Absolutely. Well, I want to invite you to come over and join in with our growing community of like minds. One of the best places to do that is facebook.com/personality hacker. We've also set up an Intuitive Awakening page, which has a support group as well, which all you have to do is apply to be part of the group, and we'll approve you. You can be part of that group. You can find that at facebook.com/intuitive awakening. And there's just a link there to click, and you can find the group right from that page. Also, you can find us at twitter.com/personality hack. And of course, we have multiple articles, recordings, videos, trainings, and products and programs available over on our website, personalityhacker.com. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for the question. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next PHQ Questions from the Personality Hacker community. INFJ wiring of the mind. Hey, it's Joel Mark Witt for Personality Hacker. As an INFJ, your mind is fundamentally wired differently from other personalities. You've probably already heard that you're an introvert, intuitive, feeler, judger, and a lot of articles and resources focus on the behaviors you show the world as an INFJ. Now, behavior can be helpful, but it isn't the complete picture when figuring out your personality. I want to give you a peek inside your mind to expose the mental wiring that makes you an INFJ. So let's get started. Your 4-letter code, INFJ, gives us insight into how your mind is learning information and making decisions. The primary way your mind sees the world is by using a mental process we've nicknamed perspectives. Its technical name is introverted intuition. When looking at the world, perspectives is interested in finding deep insight. It tends to ask a lot of discovery questions like, what is the meaning of knowledge? What are the long-range implications of emerging social trends? How are two people in an argument actually agreeing with each other without realizing it? Imagine a 4-passenger car. If one of your mental processes could drive, it would be perspectives. Using this mental process puts you in flow. You've been using it your whole life. It's your reality filter and it informs what captures your attention. So if perspectives is how you see the world as an INFJ, then the mental process we've nicknamed harmony is how you make your best decisions. Harmony is a feeling process and asks the question, what gets everyone's needs met? Think about that 4-passenger car again. If perspectives is in the driver's seat, then harmony is in the front passenger seat. It's your co-pilot mental process and what we call your growth state. Of course, this is a 4-passenger car, so you also have 2 mental processes in the back seat. Sitting right behind the co-pilot is a mental process we call accuracy. Accuracy asks the question, does this make sense? It's a thinking process concerned with data, truth, and congruity of thought. When not used in a healthy way, accuracy can cause an INFJ to withdraw and become hypercritical of themselves and other people. This mental process has the development of about a 10-year-old child. Finally, behind the driver of perspectives sits a mental process we've nicknamed sensation. We call this your blind spot or 3-year-old mental process. Sensation is all about real-time kinetics and understanding the world through your physical senses by being fully immersed in the here and now. Notice we haven't talked about INFJ behaviors. Instead, I've been talking about the mental wiring of your mind. Behaviors can give us clues to how your mind is wired, but it's far more interesting to dive into what causes our behaviors as people. Here at Personality Hacker, we don't talk about personality types for their own sake. We think understanding your personality is one of the best ways to frame your personal growth journey. And we attract INFJs who are interested in personal growth. Next up, I want to talk about the best way to grow yourself as an INFJ. Remember the car model we used to show the mental wiring of your personality? As an INFJ, your co-pilot is the mental process called harmony. Its technical name is extroverted feeling. This is what we call your growth position. It's the highest leverage point for growth in your personality. Harmony allows you as an INFJ to make decisions that help you answer the question, what gets everyone's needs met? Here are some ways that INFJs can phrase questions using their harmony process. Am I truly giving back or just seeking approval? What's the kind thing I can do, not just the nice thing? How can I be available to meet people's needs without compromising my own? Does it make sense for me to put aside all my desires for this relationship? Harmony encourages you as an INFJ to proactively set boundaries for yourself and others, leading to an ultimately happier atmosphere. It's easy for an INFJ to get lost in seeking the approval of others. But if those relationships are never built on intimacy and understanding, you will always feel like something is missing. Growing your harmony process can be a challenge for you as an INFJ. It can feel threatening to your heart to become vulnerable and speak up in the outside world. Every personality type tends to avoid growing their co-pilot mental process. But here lies the power of understanding your personality. Don't see your harmony as something to delay or avoid. Embrace getting into this mental process because it gives you the opportunity to create boundaries and become an empowered INFJ. Harmony also encourages an INFJ to get out of the perfectionism cycle, replacing it with the concept, I too grant approval to others. No one is the final arbiter of approval for you. As an INFJ, you can also give and withhold your approval. Setting boundaries in the outside world gets your needs met. It feels right to focus on the part you play in the approval-disapproval social game. If you want to quickly connect with others and remain empowered, you'll need to get out of your comfort zone and set boundaries in the real world. As an INFJ, your mind is already wired to create win-wins. Don't ignore this natural talent that you possess. Start asking, what boundaries can I create in the real world? Spend some focused time feeling through the pain points that you know need boundaries in your life. Say no to every request for one full day. It doesn't matter how easy the request is. Just say no to practice setting boundaries. Ask, what me time will I create for myself today? Pay attention to crazy makers, those people who step on your boundaries. Practice standing up for yourself when they come into your world and demand your attention. Do what it takes to set your personal boundaries. As an INFJ, you will bring the best version of yourself to the world when you open your heart to others, fully empowered, with strong personal boundaries in place. We'd love for you to keep us up to date about your journey. One of the best places to do that is at our Facebook page, facebook.com/personalityhacker. And of course, come over to personalityhacker.com, leave a comment, ask a question, or take our personality test. Next, I want to talk about the defense strategies your mind uses that steal happiness from you, and of course, what to do about it. The word defensive, you probably think of an emotional state or someone getting offended in the moment. She's acting so defensive, someone might say. But I'm not talking about emotions. I'm using the word positionally. As an INFJ, you have a specific area of your mind that you defend. As an INFJ, that's your accuracy process, sitting in the back seat of your car. It has the sophistication of a 10-year-old child. And that's okay when you use this process to create intimacy or playfulness. The trouble starts when you begin to allow this 10-year-old process to seduce you into a self-protective space. As an INFJ, accuracy, its technical name is introverted thinking, generally shows up as withdrawal and a critical spirit. Accuracy is in a large part about cold facts and consulting your inner logical truth on a matter. When done well, accuracy is about rooting out biases and inconsistencies of logic. But when you're using accuracy defensively, it won't be about fault finding in a person's logic. It will be about finding fault with the person themselves. You may keep people at arm's length, often through criticism. You're much more at peace and happy when you're focused on positive, connective relationships. If your 10-year-old gets in the mix, it will encourage you to withdraw from creating intimate and satisfying bonds. In an effort to protect yourself from being vulnerable, you deny yourself the opportunity to be truly connected and understood. At worst, INFJs can even become physical shut-ins, so afraid of being vulnerable that they rarely leave the house and instead choose to wallow in their own self-loathing about being perpetually misunderstood. Focus more on creating healthy boundaries around people's energy rather than strategies to synthesize invulnerability. Don't let your accuracy process steal your happiness. The solution is to focus on growing your harmony process like we've talked about before. As an INFJ, you're much more connected and happy when you're focused on meeting the needs of those around you and yourself. If your 10-year-old of accuracy gets into the mix, it will encourage a critical spirit and an unwillingness to open your heart to others. Now, I want to hear from you. How are you letting your 10-year-old of accuracy hijack your happiness? And what are the ways you as an INFJ are playing it safe? You can leave a comment or take our personality test over at personalityhacker.com. And next up, we'll talk about how you best show and receive love as an INFJ. I've got 2 quick lists for you today. First, how INFJs ask, do you love me? Second, how INFJs show other people love. Here are a few examples of how INFJs ask, do you love me? Just imagine an INFJ asking these questions. Do you feel connected to me? Will you check in and make sure I'm okay? Will you acknowledge and take care of my needs? Am I safe with you? Do you accept and approve of me? Here are some examples of INFJs saying, yes, I love you. Just imagine an INFJ making these statements. I will meet your needs before I meet my own. I will check in regularly to make sure you're okay. I will do my best to keep my morale up. I will show you appreciation in whatever way I'd like to be shown appreciation. As an INFJ, you're probably nodding in agreement. Just remember that other personalities can sometimes see these ways you show love as smothering or intrusive. Feel free to share with people in your life how your mind works. Let them know the ways you show love are truly connective for you. If you want to go deeper in your personal development, we have a ton of resources, articles, and recordings about personal development through the lens of understanding your personality. come over to personalityhacker.com. Next up, let's talk about where to go next in your personal growth as an INFJ. I have some action steps for you. We've been talking about you, the INFJ personality type. I've already detailed the mental wiring of your mind. We've talked about your highest leverage point for growth and shed some light on your defensive strategies. And we've outlined how you give and receive love. So what's next for you as an INFJ? How will you launch yourself on a personal development journey that works for you? Understanding that each of us have a unique personal growth path seems obvious, and yet self-help authors and teachers often teach a one-size-fits-all model of growth. At Personality Hacker, it works well to personalize your development as an INFJ. So that's how we've designed all of our frameworks and models. You now know the mental process to grow yourself as an INFJ is harmony. Most INFJs want to create win-wins in the outside world. They want to connect people and provide a happy environment. As an INFJ, there is nothing as rewarding as seeing your loved ones enjoying life and living it to the fullest. The enemy of harmony is cold, distant criticism. Harmony requires the strength to wade through a world of people in pain, looking for someone to act as an emotional dialysis machine. You, as an INFJ, have to set up healthy boundaries in order for you to get your needs met. It's the only way for you to show up at your best and not in an ungenerous, unnourished state. Set up your conditions to access this mental process of harmony as much as possible. When you come across someone with an unmet need, put yourself in their shoes to determine what that need may be. If you cannot identify it, ask them what it could be in a loving way. Some people may not know themselves, so offer to talk about it until the need is identified. Give plenty of genuine affirmation, but avoid praise if you don't mean it. Offer honest support, and be okay if the timing just isn't right for them yet. Work on building each of these skills, especially the ones that are most challenging for you. It's common for INFJs to feel almost spiritually satisfied once they conquer their fear of vulnerability and experience connection with solid personal boundaries in place. Most of your growth as an INFJ happens by thoughtfully opening your heart to others. If you really want to deep dive into your individual growth plan as an INFJ, I invite you to check out our INFJ Personal Development Starter Kit. You can find more information at personalityhacker.com. And let me know what personal growth actions you're taking in your life and what has already resonated with you. I'm Joe Mark Witt for Personality Hacker. I'll talk with you real soon.
Hey everyone, the name is Eric Thor and I'm here to talk to you today about the INFP's core archetype. I call the INFP's dominant archetype the fairy. The fairy in the sense of an almost magical creature with kind of unexplainable gifts and abilities. The ability to read people, the ability to change what nobody thinks is possible, and the ability to understand and to read anyone and to understand life and people and what is going on inside of everyone's heads and minds. INFPs see what nobody else can see. INFPs notice things most people miss. INFPs understand, accept, forgive. They are in their nature very forgiving people. INFPs usually live away from society, away from the power games, away from the structures. Self-actualized INFPs prefer these ways of being, living in nature, living in secluded areas, living away from where the world is more overwhelming, where the world is more tough, where the world is more harsh. INFPs prefer to live away from the world and away from stress, but can and gladly enjoy stepping out of themselves and going out to help people in some way. They like meeting new people, they like learning more about people, they like studying people, they are like reporters asking a lot of questions. understanding and testing you and observing who you are and how you behave and how you treat others. INFPs act as ethical compasses in a sense. They advise, they give feedback on how we should live and how we should treat ourselves and how we should treat others around us. They act as kind of protectors of the weak in the same sense as ENFPs do. They stand up for the ones that are defenseless or that feel weak, or the ones that are fragile and can't fight for themselves. INFPs often are prone to either being vegans or promoting environmentalism, or in some other way trying to make a small difference as people in their own daily lives, trying to do something where they live or where they are in life, or trying to live in a way that they can agree with. INFPs tend to become people that are highly respected for their personality, for standing up for themselves, for developing a unique way of dressing, being, talking, and expressing themselves. INFPs tend to have very developed personal identities, not just in knowing their values, but in finding unique ways to express it, ways to talk, speak, act, ethical values, social and cultural considerations, all kinds of ideas and notions about how you should be and how you should treat others that are in many ways unique to the INFP. INFPs live in accordance with some kind of magical or natural law, in a sense that they know or have some semblance of idea in their own head about how the world should be, how things should be, how they should live, where they should live, in that sense of just knowing and just having developed existential awareness and insight. INFPs can develop this kind of map inside them, using introverted intuition, going and developing various ideas, and often creative ideas in their nature, ideas and of options. I could do this, and then I could do that, and then I could do this, and then I could live like that, and then I could change this, and then I could fix that. Just being able to observe and get ideas about what to do next. INFPs always have an idea of what to do next. INFPs usually have and see options if they develop this ability. INFPs embody the fairy archetype when they become self-actualized, only when they become self-actualized. And on the road to becoming self-actualized, INFPs can struggle with many things. If INFPs are in a world where people don't really listen to them, or where people don't really take them seriously, if they are in a world where the only thing that matters is money, material wealth, or status, INFPs can become more aggressive, they can become more angry, and they can start acting out. INFPs can find themselves becoming temperamental, overwhelmed, or prone to stress, and lashing out at other people around them if they don't get the important needed alone time. INFPs are private, and they need a lot of privacy to develop and to understand and to see the bigger picture. And if they don't take time for that privacy, their intuition becomes watered out. They start becoming inattentive, they start losing their attention span, they can't listen to or take in what other people are saying, and they can't pay attention to the world around them. When INFPs force themselves to be attentive against their own will, it's a half form of attention, it's a forced attention, it's a fake attention. And INFPs can struggle with this, especially when younger. INFPs can also feel forced into a traditional stereotype, and INFPs can find themselves having to work hard to break out of stereotypes and out of traditions and traditional ideas about how they should be and how they should act. Other people might think you need to be like this or do that or work in that atmosphere or that place or that situation. But INFPs need liberation, need freedom, and are free-spirited in their nature. And if they don't respect that in themselves, they lose a lot of their creative gifts, and they lose a lot of their ability to think of options. So INFPs have a healthy rebellious tendency, a tendency to be contrarian, to question, to challenge what people believe and take for granted, to question stereotypes and norms and what people say about them. Not because the people are necessarily wrong or correct, but because INFPs need to find and to answer for their own, to find their own answer in relation to the world around them. bouncing off what happens around them and seeing their own ways of doing things. INFPs are people that struggle with sometimes feeling weak or powerless. Being an introverted and feeling type, that is often a common issue. Feeling weak and powerless in relation to society. Thinking, who am I in relation to this bigger system, to this bigger society? People, the system will always win. The people in power will always get what they want. And there's nothing I can do as an individual. But often INFPs turn out to be very wrong in this notion. And it's often the INFPs that bring out the greatest transformation in society. INFPs that question, INFPs that become catalysts, INFPs that see change and that grab change and that do what nobody else thought or dared to do. In that sense, INFPs can be very brave, very, very brave in tackling and challenging and asking questions, noticing that the emperor is naked and saying it honestly, speaking out and being honest about how you see the world and how you feel about the world. While everyone else might try to cover up the truth or smooth things over or pretend the problem isn't there, INFPs naturally tend to speak out, but not in anger, not in a judgmental sense, not in trying to be harsh or condemning towards others, but simply out of modesty. Modesty and honesty is often interrelated. A person that is more modest is also often more honest about themselves. They don't try to be something they're not. They don't try to cover up. They don't try to lie to fit in. So INFPs might sometimes feel bad about this. They might feel that their honesty and their modesty won't get them anywhere, that they need to lie or pretend to be something they're not to get approval, or that they will never be accepted by society because they can't lie, because they can't fake like other people seem to be able to. Now INFPs recognize that there is a strength in being honest, and that the person that becomes honest and turns out to be right in hindsight gains a lot of respect. If you can prove that you have been honest in the past and that your honesty is there, a lot of people will come to value that. A lot of people will come to ask you for your opinion, knowing that you will be truthful with them, knowing that you will tell them exactly how you feel and exactly what things are. And in this, INFPs are and naturally tend to gravitate towards advisor roles. INFPs don't try to be managers, don't try to be executives, don't try to be the people that call the shots and make the calls and that say, hey, everyone, this is what we do. Try to be the ones that give feedback, give information people need to understand the situation. Focus on making people dream, making people think about who they are, who they want to be, what they could become, make people aware of potential, make people aware of life and the importance and the value of life. Make people be more true to themselves, guide people towards who they are, show people who they are, reflect back at them what they say, to show them what you see inside of them. See people see their potential and free up people see their potential and free up your own potential. Don't feel weak, you're not weak, you're miraculously strong in your ability to go against the flow, and in your ability to question, and in your ability to be true to self. There is nothing weak about being empathic or being able to understand or being able to see how another person is feeling. There is nothing weak about being honest, and there is nothing to lose from being modest. If you can master these tricks, you can become self-actualized as an INFP. And you can become an INFP fairy, a person of high magical powers, a person that can do what nobody else thought was possible, a person that can show people the truth of the world, a person that can guide, a person that can heal, a person that can make people feel at peace with themselves, a person that can be a sense of recharge and energy and a kind of battery for all of us. With all that in mind, are you true to yourself? Do you feel good about yourself right now? What do you feel like you need the most development in? Is it your introverted feeling? Is it your introverted intuition, your need for privacy? Is it your intuitive perceiving and your need to go your own way in life? Or is it perhaps your feeling perceiving and your ability to be honest and to be truthful? take a look at yourself and where you are right now. It's important to sometimes take a step back, to see the bigger picture, to see where you're going, and to see where you can be in life, and to verify that. A lot of INFPs try to be something they're not, to feel bad about who they are, for no reason at all. But then again, we live in a society blasted with advertisements telling you how to be, telling you how to look, how to dress, how to talk, and everyone is becoming more or less the same. So I'm glad we have the INFPs out there that can remind us that this is stupid and unnecessary, and it won't make us happy. That's all I have to say about the INFP. What do you think about this archetype? What do you value in INFPs? What do you relate to in the INFP archetype? And what do you struggle to recognize in yourself? Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.
Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Markowitz.
And I'm Antonia Couch.
I love, Tony and I both love, the HBO TV show The Wire. You've never seen this. It's an incredible show. 5 seasons. And basically, we talked about this in the podcast before, but basically the show The Wire, over 5 seasons, takes the city of Baltimore in the United States, and it looks at the drug trade and ecosystem that supports the drug trade in the city of Baltimore over 5 seasons. And it follows a set of characters in the police department, but each season takes a slice or a viewpoint of the drug trade in Baltimore City. Now, I lived in Baltimore City for a while, and I can tell you that it's very interesting to watch how the different layers of viewing the city and the city's challenges are in each season. Season 1, it looks at the street drug trade, like the actual dealers that are on the street. It looks at it from their viewpoint. Season 2, it looks at the dock workers and the imports, how drugs get into the harbor in Baltimore City. I think Season 3 looks at the government and all the developers and all the people that are benefiting financially from a business side from the drug trade, and all the backhanded payments and all this stuff. Season 4 deals with the school system and how the school system interplays and ties into the drug trade. And the final season, Season 5, looks at the news media and the Baltimore Sun offices and how the newspapers and the media play into the narratives around the drug trade and all the reason of this. So it's a fascinating show looking, and we really see it as a systems thinking looking, or systems viewpoint of all the challenges and intercomplexities of Baltimore City and the drug trade and the social challenges and all the things that are there around drugs. Fascinating show. It's a little violent, and there's a ton of objectionable content, as you can imagine. It's an HBO show, so some of that stuff would bother you. Don't watch it. But if that stuff is okay for you, you can get through some of the violence and sex and stuff like this. I think it's a fascinating show to see the slices of life, of the drug trade in Baltimore City and life around it. But the reason I bring that up is because today we're going to talk about why the world needs introverted intuition. It's a perceiving process. This is the process that's used as a strength by NTJs and NFJs in the Myers-Briggs system. So NJs in the Myers-Briggs system, as this is a strength. And we've nicknamed this process perspectives. The reason I mentioned The Wire is we were talking about this before we started the show, and we realized that The Wire is a great example of someone taking the filmmakers, the TV show producers, the showrunners, creating perspectives, almost slices of perspective, layering through the different elements of the drug trade from different, like, strata in Baltimore City. It's almost taking a different perspective, and it starts at the street level and zooms way out to the narrative casters at the news media, how they cast the narrative around all this. And it just layers it in season after season. Again, fascinating show, but we think it's a good example of how perspectives can look at things in some ways, like a tangible representation of how perspectives can see what's going on from different viewpoints.
So this is the 4th in our series of why the world needs fill-in different cognitive function. We started with the introverted functions. We've already done introverted thinking, introverted sensing, and introverted feeling. And those 3 functions, Joel and I have somewhere in our car model, or what's technically called our cognitive function stack.
So I use introverted thinking as my auxiliary or co-pilot. Joel uses introverted feeling as his auxiliary or co-pilot, and we both use introverted sensing as our three-role or inferior function. And so we can talk about those functions from the inside. Even introverted sensing, that's our inferior three-role function, we can at least talk about it as people who use it in some fashion, even if it's our aspiration, even if we have a push-pull relationship with it, we still have a more of a relationship with it than we do with introverted intuition, which would be a shadow function of ours. For both of us as ENTPs, it would be our fifth function, but it's really not as accessible to us as our first four functions. And so we're going to throw a little love at introverted intuition, but as admirers from the outside. Like, not as people who are contending with it and using it every day, all day. So when we were talking about introverted thinking, Joel was basically interviewing me. When we were talking about introverted feeling, I was interviewing him. And then we both talked about our mutual, admiration of and use of and some of the challenges we've had with introverted sensing ourselves as our inferior aspiration. But introverted intuition we're going to be talking about as a function that we have seen in action and observed from people who we love dearly. Both of our mothers are INJs. We've had many good friends who have been INTJs and INFJs, ENFJs and ENTJs. My brother's an ENTJ. So we have familiarity with it, but it's not going to be from an insider's perspective. That said, I wonder if it has to be. I mean, we still, I believe, can be good advocates for this function because we have such admiration for it. And we've seen it be so helpful. And as we were jotting down notes and talking about, we actually didn't jot down notes for any of the other functions, but because this one is not native to us in our four function stack or our car model, we jotted down quite a few notes about what we love about it so much. And we didn't want to make the mistake of conflating it with any of the functions we use. So when we talked about introverted feeling in that podcast, we talked a lot about narrative. So we asked the question, well, how's introverted intuition different than narrative? And then we talked a lot about introverted thinking's acceptance of reality and looking for truth. And so we were talking about, how is it different from that function? So we'll be doing a little compare-contrast too, because introverted intuition is one of the most difficult functions for people to really wrap their heads around. It's complex, and it's even complex for the people who are using it. And so since it's so difficult to understand and to explain, then it can be easy to not even know it exists. Unlike introverted sensing, which is easy to sort of go, well, that's just, particularly for intuitives that are into type, it's like, well, that's a boring function. Well, it's not. It's not boring at all. In fact, it's incredibly fleshed out and extremely vital in our opinion. For introverted thinking and introverted feeling, both of them, they bring great gifts, and it's very easy to overlook or not like the gifts that both of those functions are bringing. But introverted intuition is easy to not even see, to not even recognize as happening. And because it's so difficult to explain what the functions and mechanisms are, it's difficult for people who are using it to get people to see what's happening. As an ENFP, kind of the starting point for this, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. This is how I experience a lot of introverted intuition. So when I'm talking to an NI user using introverted intuition, often, they can go really deep with me and try to understand where I'm coming from. I've had this happen so many times where I'm talking to, let's just say, an INFJ or INTJ, and they basically really, truly understand what's going on. It's really interesting how they can get into my version of what's happening and understanding me and give me a sense of understanding. But the one thing in the midst of it that I don't feel is I don't feel the same amount of empathy necessarily. But I do feel a definite underpinning of true understanding. And I think it's always a disconnect for me because when I truly understand somebody, it's through empathy using my introverted feeling process. I understand them by, if I was that person, this is kind of how I'd be feeling. And I don't feel that as much from introverted intuition. Now, I think it's there. I think that obviously there is an empathy with NI users, introverted intuitive users. But what I think is interesting about introverted intuition is it almost feels objective away from the empathy. It can almost have understanding without having to have empathy to create it. It can just have understanding for understanding's sake. And at first, that was really unnerving to me. I remember talking to an INTJ friend of mine around some some jealousy issues I was having like 15 years ago, or 10 years ago or something. And he was basically trying to, he fully was understanding how I was feeling, and it was kind of like perspective shifting into my reality, and even repeating back to me some of the insecurities and jealousy I had feeling. But I wasn't feeling emotional resonance. It was just a true cerebral understanding. And I was almost like, oh, he's not really with me. He doesn't really understand. He's just going to empathize. But I think he really truly understood the perspective I was coming from. I think that's really the core that I start at when I think of introverted intuition. That this ability to do that is not my skill set. I think is actually, it could be looked at as a detriment. I think it's a superpower.
Well, it's because introverted intuition isn't coming through emotion. Like, I think a lot of times when people want to feel understood, really what they're also seeking is validation.
Absolutely.
And being able to fully understand somebody or something isn't the same thing as validating them or even sanctioning them.
That's a much better word than empathy, I think. It's validation. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because I actually think, and an INTJ friend one time told me that if you fully understand another human being, the only thing you can feel is compassion. So if you're not feeling compassion for them, you haven't actually gotten to the bottom of what really makes them tick. So compassion is a result of that spelunking into somebody else's experience. It's not the avenue, it's not the mechanism. And I think what you're talking about is oftentimes the mechanism of understanding the other person is through compassion. It is through an emotional resonance. But for somebody who's using introverted intuition, that can be a result, but it's not the mechanism that they go through. And to explain why we started this out with The Wire, it's because when we were discussing the difference between introverted intuition and, say, the narrative casting we mentioned with introverted feeling. So we talked about introverted feeling being all about narratives. And one could think that introverted intuition is all about narratives too, because it's talking about another person's perspective and how they're experiencing the world. But a narrative is constructed to express the writer's intent more than simply tell a story. Like, the story is the way that a narrative caster, it's the vehicle they're using for their own personal intent. With introverted intuition, whatever world is created or painted doesn't necessarily come with it intent. It doesn't necessarily have to have a narrative along with it. It's just sort of looking at a simulation of reality. Getting inside another person's perspective, or getting inside a meta perspective like The Wire did. The Wire took a single thread or theme, and it studied it on a meta perspective from multiple different institutions. And so it took this sort of 20,000-foot view, and then when it found a compelling aspect of it, it zoomed in and observed how this element was feeding into the entire system. And it did it with so many different threads and veins, but it didn't tell a story about good and bad. It didn't tell a story about, I mean, it had some very compelling characters, don't get me wrong, it's one of the reasons why The Wire is so fascinating. And at the same time, it wasn't really about the characters. It was like the institutions were the characters. And these individual characters that fed into the institutions were props for the institution itself, which is very different than a different kind of storytelling or narrative casting that maybe somebody with introverted feeling would be using, which is to apply intent to all of it. At the end of The Wire, and I don't want to give anything away in case you've never seen it and you want to go watch it, but at the end of The Wire, there wasn't really any intent other than studying this thing. There wasn't a moral at the end of it. There wasn't a, like a final, like, this is how the world should be, or this is how the world shouldn't be. There was really nothing that it was trying to moralize.
I think they did give you a lot to think about, though.
Tons to think about. Like, I never felt like I truly understood a city before I watched The Wire. And it's just, there's so many implications on a systems level. It was just mind-blowing. It's hands down my favorite series of all time. The Wire is hands down my favorite series. And
especially looking at the Greg's model of systems thinking, it's really helpful to see those things through that lens.
You want to understand systems thinking and emergent properties of systems? Well, watch The Wire. The Wire will give you so many nodes. It will help you understand concepts of systems like crazy, and it does it in an entertaining way, so it kind of smuggles it in. That said, introverted intuition personalizes all of this. There were personal, compelling characters, but don't get too attached to them in The Wire. And if you get too attached to the characters, then you'll miss the true character, which are the institutions in the city itself. The city is really the character. And so introverted intuition gives us an ability to study things dispassionately so that we can really see what's going on. Now, for NTJs, they're more likely to look at it through these concepts of systems, and NFJs are more likely to look at people as systems. But both can play both sides. They really can. And it's really about removing the individual's personal feelings so that those personal feelings don't create bias within these. So again, the mechanism isn't the personal piece. To be able to really get underneath what's going on, really get underneath what's happening. And again, fully clocked introverted intuition is a simulation of extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing is the polar opposite, which is just observing reality as it's coming to you. It's observing the sensory stimuli you're getting in a real world setting. But instead of having to go to the outside world and in that moment picking up all those sensory details, introverted intuition simulates that process internally. So it can construct entire realities that engages with almost as if it's engaging with it in reality.
Yeah, you think of like Tolkien creating the entire world, right? And his entire viewpoint. It's a very, whether or not it can be argued whether or not he's an introverted into a user, I think he is personally. Even with him in person, we are hesitant to type anyone we've never met in person.
And unlikely ever will, considering unless there's an afterlife.
Point taken. But if it is the kind of thing an introverted intuitive user would do, is create this rich world that's just complex. It almost can like mind palace or see it in almost an extroverted sensing way within their own head space. One quick thing I want to make a note of here. When you talk about a dispassionate view of things with introverted intuition, someone that listens to the show or content around introverted thinking might say, well, that sounds a lot like introverted thinking, what you're talking about here. I mean, that's what introverted thinking does, right? It takes all the narrative out, it just looks at what is, it looks at the real data underneath it all. And the first distinction I would make is, remember, introverted thinking is a judging process, something you use to make criteria to make decisions about what to do, what should be done, actions, things of this nature. Introverted intuition is a perceiving process, a learning process, the input process, the lens you see reality through. So that's just already a difference here. One is a judging function, one is a perceiving function. Some of the language sounds similar, and there's more distinctions to them, but that's just the first initial and the surface distinction. As you start to hear us talk about this, with some of the concepts that might sound like the other.
Introverted thinking is looking for truth.
Yeah.
Like it has a motivation as well. Just like introverted feeling is looking for intent and desire, introverted thinking is looking for truth and what makes sense to the individual, analytical, logical sense. And so it's got an end game. It wants something. Introverted intuition doesn't particularly want anything. It follows its internal mimetic or cerebral bliss, really. It's allowing things to surface. It's allowing things to sort of come to the person. I guess you could argue that it has the intent of insight, but it doesn't really want anything. The perceiving functions don't really want stuff. They just are looking at things. It's the thing that captures their attention. And so for introverted intuition, the thing that captures their attention is simulated reality. That's the thing that captures their attention. And so because of that, they build on it. But it's not necessarily for any specific endgame. Now, of course, none of the functions are used in isolation or in silos. So once you start attaching judging functions to them, now all things are tools to be used in whatever is motivating the judging function it's associated with. But the function itself, pretending it could work in isolation, doesn't really have any of that. So it's very different than introverted thinking and introverted feeling. And it's also very different than introverted sensing. Introverted sensing, which has a past orientation, which is about impressions that have been built up over time, impressions that are experiential. And it's already gone through an experience, and then it mines the gold from that experience. Introverted intuition doesn't have to experience something. it takes what it understands about sensory stimuli, and then it creates these simulations of reality. It doesn't have to have ever experienced something before in order to imagine it. It just pulls on what it knows to be true about sensory stimuli. So the question isn't what is introverted intuition, which I believe we talked about and addressed in a million other podcasts. The question is, what is the usefulness of that? Why does the world need that?
I look at it almost to start with the why is it needed. I use my imagination, my intuition, to rewind the clock way back to cavewoman times. To think in terms of when you are in survival mode as a cave person, and you have to go kill your, dinner that night, or hunt for berries, or whatever you're doing to survive. That world is a very extroverted, sensing world. You have to be alert. You have to watch for predators. You have to go and hunt for your food. You have to be aware of weather. You have to be aware of what's happening in the real life environment. But you also have to be able to speculate in some ways about what's going to be coming. And it's like almost this ability to say, or it's this need to be able to predict things, like a spidey sense of sorts. So I think that almost if you look back into the evolutionary underpinnings of this, I believe, just opinion, just by my imagination, that introverted intuition probably developed to be able to help us speculate on what's coming so we could survive. It was actually a mechanism of survival, of predictability for weather. Maybe we have a sixth sense of a predator that's circling the campfire. You're outside the circle, we can't see. We just have the hair on the back of our neck stands up. We have an extroverted sensing response, but also that's coming from an introverted intuitive sense of, well, there might be danger in that darkness over there. My imagination projects what might be behind that veil of darkness. So I think when you zoom way back to see almost my imagination of how it might have evolved, and again, I don't know this to be true, but that seems to be the root of maybe some of the usefulness that we can now build upon. Because I think the reason why we spent so much time at the beginning of this defining introverted intuition, it is a complex process to understand, I think, and especially probably from my perspective and your perspective, Antonio, because we don't use it. So, like, to get our heads around it, because it's not experiential for us. We have to almost speculate on how that would feel to you guys. We have to speculate on how it would feel to you. And so that whole survival thing, I think, is the origination point. And you can see this bearing out. I think a great example of an introverted, intuitive style looking at what could kill us as a species or take us out survival-wise is the show Black Mirror on Netflix. It's looking at certain social things and certain structural things in our world and not projecting too far in the future, just a couple decades maybe, with technology advances to... I mean, that show gets pretty dark pretty quick. It's called Black Mirror for a reason. It's a really fascinating, introverted, intuitive look at what's possible in the future and how bad things could go for us, how they could threaten our survival. So I believe that introverted intuition was designed for, like, it came about for survival reasons, the core of what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I can just speculate that all the functions did evolve specifically for survival, but I think you're right. I think introverted intuition probably developed to assist in an immediate survival situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see that it's kind of used in a similar fashion when people have it as a tertiary or 10-year-old or a 3-year-old or inferior function like the SPs. They still use it as a way to accentuate their extroverted sensing. You can see this with athletes and for early responders. We've talked a lot about this and how the polarities function, but they will, they'll use this ability to sort of see what can't be seen or anticipate or something very quickly, and be right. But there are speculations about something in speed and quick movements are accurate when they're folding in introverted intuition as an assist. That said, I think Black Mirror is a fantastic example of how introverted intuition is very helpful for humanity. Because again, it runs a simulation. That show is all about running simulations. What would it look like if this happened? What would it look like if this happened? What would it look like if we implemented this technology? What would it look like if we implemented this technology? How would people respond? And so all of these simulations, and we're using them as entertainment, almost like introverted feeling is using narrative and art and expression to help people access parts of themselves, their intents and their desires and understand maybe some of the darker parts of who they are. So through an entertainment lens, they're allowed to study themselves and the parts of who they are in a way that's non-threatening. Introverted intuition does it as a teaching opportunity, as almost like not a lesson, but almost like it could be a lesson. Because if you're running all these simulations about how things could be and they don't turn out that well, right, then there's a little bit of a moralistic piece to Black Mirror, which indicates that it's using more than just introverted intuition. But it also helps us see what would happen if something that we're not really taking full weight of the implications of right now, if we're not really weighing them. And I think maybe that might be one of the biggest gifts that introverted intuition gives us, which is the importance of consequences. Like, there's always going to be a future implication to everything that's done. And so if we are not able to see consequences, if we're not able to see down the road far enough to understand that if we knock this first domino over, what's going to happen at the end of all of this? Introverted intuition has the capacity to not only run the simulation, but share a way of running the simulation where other people can understand. Because not all of us have the ability to really see that. We don't see each domino getting knocked down. We don't have the ability to run that simulation. And I think when introverted intuition is done well, they're running simulations all the time. That's what they're doing in their heads. They're running a simulation of a reality that isn't yet. And maybe sometimes a reality that could never be, which is why a lot of writers and people who have created fantasy worlds are using this function, because they're able to run a simulation of something that will never be. That's why it's one of the most amazing functions, honestly, is its ability to tap into the depth of imagination. But while it's running those simulations, it's also helping us understand how our minds operate. If you watch a Black Mirror episode and you see an implication of a technology, we're still watching people be people, just with a new node in the system, this technology. And so it goes back to fundamental principles about how human beings are. It's not like a technology is going to change our fundamental humanness. We're still going to bring all of ourselves into the future with us. Unless we evolve as individuals, unless we change our systems, we're going to bring ourselves into that new place. So the technology can't save us from ourselves. All the technology will do is allow us to use it for our own ends and purposes. And so when these simulations are being run, they're being run in a relatively realistic way. We bring ourselves into that. And so if we don't listen to those lessons, right, if we allow ourselves to be entertained, but not to understand the implications, then once again, just like with introverted thinking, introverted feeling, and even introverted sensing, we like them in the abstract, but we're not actually making good use of their gifts. And if we don't have introverted intuition represented as a way to help us understand implications and understand long-range consequences and understand our basic humanness, because as a function that is able to jump perspectives into different people's minds, they're seeing what actually kind of makes us all tick. Now, introverted feeling understands that we all share the same humanness, like on a profound emotional level. What's most personal is universal and vice versa. So if something is deeply personal, it means that this is probably a shared subjective experience. But introverted intuition isn't just looking at our shared subjective experiences, they're looking at our wiring. They're looking at what are the fundamental principles of a human mind. How do minds operate? What are the patterns that human minds have a tendency to attach to? What are the patterns of the patterns? And so these are things that make us who we are as a macro, right? And so if the perfect introverted feeling statement is whatever is most personal is most universal, maybe a perfect introverted intuition statement would be the micro reflects the macro and the macro reflects the micro. Like we're all fractals of a general human construction. And so we're going to bring those fundamental human fractal elements, those micro means the macro and vice versa. We're going to bring those into whatever simulation gets run. And so if we want to avoid bad consequences, then we're going to have to make peace with who we are, and we're going to have to listen to some of those lessons.
On the macro, the ability for all those perspectives and viewpoints to be taken in almost dispassionately through that introverted, intuitive process. I said earlier, it was a while for me to get used to introverted, intuitive users not having that deep sense of empathy or that emotional resonance that I would expect, because again, this is an introverted feeling. But I really have come to appreciate it on the micro level. So when you sit down with an AI user, let's say they're playing peacekeeper or negotiator between two different parties, they often, if they're developed, can bring a brilliance to that. Because if I'm in conflict with someone, person A over here, and the introverted intuitive person then can help us see each other's point of view in the context of that, without necessarily having their own stake in the game, because they can dispassionately see the perspectives we're each coming from. They can often help us arrive at a shared reality. So wherein, I've said this before, in our modern world, we have a lot of disagreements right now, not on what to do about things. Like, most of the disagreements I see in the world aren't people that agree on the reality they're seeing. It's not like, I see the sky is blue. What do we do about that? It's one person says they have a different reality. One person says, I see the sky is blue. The other person says, I see the sky is pink. And it's impossible to talk about what to do about those colors when we can't even agree on the color in the first place. So I think introverted intuition comes in here to help us get a sense of, okay, what color are we actually, you're talking about blue, you're talking about pink, what are we actually talking about here? And they get us to the point where we can actually at least get to a simulated shared reality to have the conversations about what to do about that. And that's really hard to get to, especially in our modern world. I think this is why introverted intuition may be needed now more than ever.
And yet, if the function itself isn't well developed, just like we talked about, introverted feeling needs to be well developed to be able to do what it does.
Because advocating isn't their best health, obviously.
Exactly. Because for introverted feeling, it understands the power of narrative, and if it doesn't really dive deep down into its own intent and motivation, then it can start to manipulate the power of narrative to get what it wants. And so the world needs really sophisticated introverted feeling. And I would argue the same thing with introverted intuition. Like, getting to that dispassionate place is sometimes actually hard for some introverted intuition users. Some NJs struggle with that. And, we talk about this dispassionate place, and there's probably some NFJs that are like, what are you talking about? Because they have the ability to be so empathetic, if their extroverted feeling gets involved, and they're now slurping up other people's emotional experiences, they can have a hard time being in that dispassionate place. But whether you're an NFJ or an NTJ, your mind has given you a place to go. If you're an NFJ, it's given you introverted thinking to get to a cold dispassionate place, which is not a bad place for you to be, especially when you need to create a little bit of psychological distance from other people. It's not good if you weaponize it, and it's not good if you use it against another person. But of course, that's just type dynamics health, and we've had a lot of podcasts on some of the best ways to use those functions. But that said, there's an ability for all NJs to go to a place where they don't have to put themselves into the situation. But if it's not well developed, one of the tricks introverted intuition can do is it can just start shifting perspectives until it finds one that suits it, until it finds a perspective that it likes. I remember an ENTJ, very good friend of mine, had gotten married, and I think it didn't take long for her to have buyer's remorse, like pretty early. And I remember talking to her about it, like, what are you gonna do? Because she was in a situation where divorce was and separation wasn't an option as far as she could tell. And I remember her saying something that just blew my mind. I mean, I was quite young at the time, but she said, I'll just find a perspective where I'm happy. And I remember thinking, you can do that? You can just find a perspective where you're happy?
INFJs do it all the time. Are you kidding me?
I'm sure they do. And I was just like, wow. And I didn't know about, again, we were quite young, and I didn't know about cognitive functions. I knew about type, but I didn't know about cognitive functions at the time. And I just remember thinking, well, that's a superpower, and I'm not sure if it's a good one. And it is a superpower, and it can be a good one. If you're in a situation where you're stuck and you literally can do nothing, being able to find a perspective that's is healthy for you you and suits you well, I think that's like a form of magic as far as I'm concerned. And if a person is in a situation where they can and maybe should change their circumstances, to live inside one's mind and to live inside simulations of happiness might not actually be what the person should do, right? Like that might not actually be serving them long term, and that might just be a matter of kicking the can down the road. Like, they're then not thinking of implications. They're actually shutting off their ability to see long-term consequences and what happens when you kick over that first domino, or that those dominoes are coming for them. And so there's a saying that what crosses supports you and what supports you crosses you, and all of our strengths can actually be turned in on ourselves, and we can use them against our own best interests. With introverted intuition, one of the challenges is that sometimes it gets so lost in its simulations that it doesn't actually bring these gifts out to the world. It just stays in something that might not be good for them, because it can find a way to make peace with it, at least for a time. And then, as far as I'm concerned, most people who are unhappy can only run a simulation for so long, because the world forces us to come visit it. And in those moments when they have to go visit the extroverted sensing world and they can't stay inside their simulation, then now you have all the challenges and problems that were there that you abandoned by going inside your own brain and just getting lost there. So the world needs sophisticated introverted intuition to keep the gift of being able to see multiple perspectives and to run simulations and to be able to see these things, these worlds that have not yet been created. But to keep them for themselves is not very helpful to anybody else. But then you look at shows like Black Mirror, and you look at other components of entertainment and art, or maybe theses, or maybe scientific discovery, or maybe whatever it is, whatever field it's in, when people bring their gifts of being able to understand that different people are they're using the same words, but they are talking about totally different realities, and the ability to help bridge those gaps. When a person who brings that gift to all of us does that, they might not always get a gratitude response. The world might not always be grateful for that. Just like with introverted thinking, I well know bringing gifts to the world doesn't mean you're always going to get a response of gratitude. And the world needs it so bad. It needs it so bad. So that really sophisticated introverted intuition, that really sophisticated way of helping us understand things that our minds are not wired to see, and being able to help us see them is really important.
One of the things I want to make sure we highlight here, because we're talking about an intuitive process, and this is the first one we've unpacked, we're also going to talk about extroverted intuition as well on a future podcast, and advocate for that. But I want to advocate for intuition in general a little bit here, in that we are entering every day a more complex world that we cannot know what's going to happen, and we can't measure everything that's going to be coming down the pike toward us. We are going to face problems, ever complex problems, more and more each day, in an ever increasingly complex and ever expanding world with an ever expanding population, and more people put into the system. And it's my belief that we need intuitives, people that use intuition as a strength, to help us shape a good future for ourselves as humanity, and to ensure that we speculate where we're going and pattern recognize where things might end up with really rigorous discipline around that viewpoint. Because there's so much of our own biases and things that come in there, that if we can get these intuitive processes hooked up, trying to streamline or eradicate as many of our own biases as possible and lean on these intuitive processes to help us problem solve and decision make in the future. It's my belief, probably yours too, Antonio, that we are not going to make it as humans unless we get really good at speculating on how things will be into the future. I think things like Black Mirror are really powerful, because I think that's what the intuitive process of introverted intuition is doing there. It's trying to give us a glimpse of, I looked at this one show recently, and it was a show where people were rating each other, star rating, based on their personal interaction with each other. Kind of like a Facebook, or almost like an Uber rating for humans, like what kind of character quality this human is. And at first you might think that's a great idea because now we know the character of somebody, like the crowd has quote unquote vetted them. But the Black Mirror episode went down the road of, if we're doing this with each other on social media, what happens if it becomes really real and we now are rated as a person? You know, we've got, I'm a person with a 2-star rating in a world of maybe people with 4-star ratings. Like, how does that work as a person being rated? Because this is something that's a real thing that's happening right now, I think, in China. And so the Black Mirror episode is looking at this, and I could see it, a whole society's rushing to this to go, this is going to solve all of our social problems. Now we'll know the character of somebody by the ratings they have, but it's also going to create a bunch of other challenges as well. So we have to be careful of the decisions we make going forward. I think the intuitive processes, and introverted intuitives in particular, can help us see a future not that far away, and ensure making the right decisions to go toward the future we actually want to create. And keep some of the expressions of intuition that may not be highly calibrated. I don't care if it's somebody who has it as their primary or inferior. Just because you have one of the intuitive process as your primary function, your cognitive function stack or karma, doesn't mean you're proficient or should be using that to help us all go someplace unless you really know what you're doing with that process, I think. But in order to help calibrate all those bad expressions of intuition, I think good intuition has to be represented. So I think it's needed, like both intuitive processes are extremely important for our world because of the complexities we're facing, because of all the challenges we're facing. It's too complex to know if I do this, it's going to result in this. It's almost our solutions have to be theory solutions or abstract solutions. I almost look at it like the economy or economics. You know, if you change one micro percentage point over here, entire industries are affected, entire economies are affected. When the Federal Reserve raises or lowers the percentage point by a fraction, entire things are swayed by that. And I think the intuitive process can see those kind of leverage points in the future. So I think it's extremely important from that side of things.
I think we should also advocate for it on a less, sort of global level and talk about its advantages on an individual personal level and why our worlds need it as individuals.
That makes me think of my dad, who's an ISFP in the Myers-Briggs system. So he actually uses introverted intuition, but it's in his 10-year-old tertiary position. And so it's not his strength as an SP, obviously. But he's just like all of our tertiaries, it's kind of this weird relationship. Sometimes we really get it right a lot, and sometimes it's a challenge for us.
Well, I think when we say that the 10-year-old or tertiary isn't a strength, it's not something that we necessarily have full talent around, but it definitely gives us, we have strength in it.
Yeah, it's just not as developed as some of the others in our stack, basically. So one thing that he can do is he has these weird, predictive models about what will happen based on behavior, and it doesn't make any sense, and often he's right. So, an example of this is, he told me and my brother, basically, when we were kids, he's like, if you keep your car clean, you won't have to take it to the mechanic shop as much. And my brother ESFP, would argue with him and say, that doesn't make any sense, Dad. How does keeping my car clean keep the engine from breaking down, or other parts of it going bad?
It's probably how you're treating your car.
Yeah, so it was almost like the viewpoint, the perspective you showed up to your car with, how you showed up to your car to keep it clean and to respect it, honor it, and keep it up. Also, was probably an indicator of how well you changed the oil, how you drove. Did you drive it too fast? Did you, rev the engine a lot?
Right, or hit speed bumps.
Yeah, cavalier about the shock absorbers or whatever else. You changed the perspective how you treated the car holistically, and it created an emergency. You couldn't, when my dad was challenged, he couldn't necessarily find all the logic points there and explain it in that way. He's just I just know that's how it is. He had it was almost like a belief he had. And again, I didn't know type at the time as a teenager, especially cognitive functions. And I didn't realize that it was probably his introverted intuitive process that was kind of getting a sense of how something in the future was going to play out based on how you play it now. But that's an example, I think, of how it can be used even for people that it's not a strength of. It has served my father well. Another thing he used to do was he did this in a very interesting way. When two teenagers at our camp were arguing, staff members or something, he would basically make them go into a room until they sorted it out and just figure out. He'd go in there with them and they would just kind of hash out each other's perspective together. So even at the tertiary level, he was able to help create some reconciliation, helping them see each other's viewpoints. So So I guess my encouragement is, even if this is something that's not, if you're an SP, it's your tertiary or your inferior, your tenure or superior, hey, this can still be a part of you. You can still lean on this in some ways. Now, it's not going to be your strength, but I think it can serve you in seeing the future, seeing a little bit down the road, having a perspective of somebody else's experience.
Yeah, my dad's an ESTP, so he has introverted intuition as his 3-year-old inferior, and I remember him making these comments that were kind of harsh, actually, but now that I'm an adult, I kind of understand what he's talking about. Like, he had a saying that he would, I don't know how often he said it often enough so that even my introverted sensing remembers it, but he said, some people don't know they're alive unless they're in pain. And as an adult, I kind of understand what he's saying. For some people, they're so caught up in whatever it is that's going on for them that they don't know that they're creating drama in order to sort of validate their existence, because they haven't been given a model of how to know that you're fully living life in a positive way, in like a happiness way. They just don't have a model of happiness. And so in order to feel sort of these spikes of life, they create drama, they create pain for themselves, unintentionally, unconsciously, and then it helps them know that they're alive. And it's not a very kind saying, it's not a very nice one. But I don't think he's entirely inaccurate. I think his introverted intuition understood a mindset. He could just tell he didn't say it that in that complex a way. He said it as a little aphorism, like some people don't know they're alive unless they're in pain. And so we're now talking about introverted intuition in a tertiary or inferior position. And at the same time, I do think that it shows that anybody who's using this function, they sort of understand mindsets. They understand how people operate, even if it's not as complex. Like I'm sure if somebody was if my mom explained it as an INFJ, if she were to fillet out what my dad meant by that, I'm sure that she would do it in a more complex way. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have access to an understanding of mindsets. And I think that's one of the ways that introverted intuition is really needed on a personal level, is it's needed to understand that people come with certain mindsets. Now, that doesn't mean that you treat them in a limited way. Like, unfortunately, I think my dad, when he saw somebody who he would define as a person who's using pain to, remind themselves of their existence, he would probably, just sort of, dismiss them. But I know my mom wouldn't, and she has introverted intuition as her driver dominant. She would actually really try to get inside the headspace and try to figure out the psychology of what's going on. So understanding mindsets, understanding that people come with these sort of packaged patterns that are happening inside of them. And when I say come with packaged patterns, I don't mean that they're like born with them and they'll live and die there. Although probably some of them mindset is that way. But being able to get inside the psychology of another person allows you to start from a place of understanding. Regardless of whether or not something like my dad is doing so, I know that the more introverted intuition is a strength, the more likely that person is to engage with another person, especially if they're in direct engagement. And it's not an abstraction. It's not like this person over here. Because my dad's little saying was about people who were not in the room. If he was actually engaged with somebody who he would define that way, and he couldn't quote-unquote dismiss them, as in like he couldn't find a way to sort of sidestep them if they were actually there in his presence and his extrovert sensing was going, okay, I have to engage with the person, he probably actually in those moments would be highly compassionate. He would feel bad for that individual. I think one of the reasons why he didn't welcome those kinds of mindsets into his world is because he felt so bad for people like that. And so I think with my mom, though, she had a lot more space to be able to understand the psychology of others, especially hurting people. And she had enough psychological space to welcome them in and try to dig down deep. And I think that that's one of the advantages to having this function represented, is that just like introverted feeling can hold space for the darkness of the heart, and introverted thinking can hold space for people's, for people's maybe darker thoughts, introverted intuition can hold space for people's mindsets that are probably not serving them. Maybe darker mindsets.
Does your mom, as an INFJ, talk to herself? Like talk out loud, like if she's at the grocery store, like shopping, does she like have conversations with herself out loud?
Yes.
Quietly.
Actually, yes. My mom did talk to herself a lot. By the way, I was going to add one more. Introverted sensing holds space for dark paths.
Oh, yes.
With people who have really dark paths, introverted sensing can really hold space for how that creates a quirkiness from an individual. Anyway, but yes, my mom did talk to herself.
Thank you for that introverted sensing part, because we did miss that. That's good to have that there too for all four. The reason why I asked you about your mom talking to yourself, because you were talking, I was thinking in terms of my mom doing something very similar. Like she would always kind of laugh, like she felt insecure. Like I just talked to myself. I think it's not okay. But I realized it's because introverted intuition is tapped into how we talk to ourselves. The inner dialogue and the meaning we make. That little voice that runs that says, "This is the meaning of this thing," whatever. That inner dialogue that's running. That's really the realm of introverted intuition, to track the meanings that are being made by those little things we say to ourselves. I think in terms of like neuro-linguistic programming, a lot of introverted intuitive people love that because it looks at how we're talking to ourselves, using the language of our minds, how are the phrases we're using constructing our reality. It's going into that at a component level and breaking it apart, saying, well, if I switch this word from I always feel this way to sometimes I feel this way, it alters the meaning, right? That's what the basis of NLP is.
Yeah, and concepts like E prime.
E prime as well, yeah, which Robert and Tim Wilson talks a lot about. We love as an INTJ. I think this inner dialogue element too is really important here. Different than narrative. It's not an inner narrative necessarily. It's not like the meaning of the intent of it. It's more the dialogue of the meaning in the moment. The meaning right now as I'm thinking about it, or like referencing it or talking to myself about it.
Yeah, well, it's trying to alter how, like, basically the neural pathways. It's watching the neural pathways and then rerouting them consciously. And not like introverted thinking, which goes into the script and looks at like the specific code that got written in.
Not beliefs. No,
it's not belief or thought specifically. It's just the neural pathways that create a psychology, that creates a mindset. Absolutely.
And as an advocate for introverted intuition right now, that's a superpower to be able to help yourself first. We talked about introverted feeling last time. Well, how do you start this? How do you have this process what you do? And I said, start with yourself. You're really good at that. And I would say the same thing for introverted intuition. I'm probably going to say that for all the functions. I bet you, I haven't even gotten there yet, but I bet you we're probably going to have that advice for most of the functions, if not all of them. But learning how to tap into that inner dialogue and the way you use words to describe the reality. Again, the meaning making, not the narrative casting or the feelings around it, the empathy of it. Again, not the truth or the details of the data of it, but the words, the way you're constructing the perspective you're seeing it in. If you, as an introverted intuitive person, can get good at reconstructing that in your own mind, see how you're forming those in your own mind, watching your own inner dialogue, how powerful would it be for you to be able to help other people tap into their inner dialogues, helping them switch the way they talk to themselves, seeing a different perspective and literally shifting their own perspectives into something else? I think that is a very powerful skill that you could bring if you're an introverted intuitive user. Imagine the power of being able to bring that to people, to yourself first and then to others, helping them do that. I think that's an incredible skill set.
Yeah, and to bring them to things like movement.
Absolutely.
And to things like something that you want to create in the world. Because I think that's one of the challenges that, like you mentioned, you've got a lot of different movements that are just disagreeing about reality itself. It's not disagreeing about what to do about things. It's disagreeing on the foundational components of it.
Premises.
The premises, exactly. And so being able to understand the premise of people, like the mindsets of people, to be able to understand on the premise level of where people are at, makes it so much easier to introduce the things that are important to you, the causes that you stand behind. Being able to introduce them in a way that they can understand as well, and that they don't just wholesale reject because you're speaking a different language that they can't access.
All right, so now it's your turn. You've been here with us for a while. You've been part of this conversation, but we need to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. If you are an introverted intuitive user, an NI user, come over and let us know how this shows up for you. Have you experienced growth in this area? What did we miss talking about? you want to come over and help advocate for the function you use. Help us advocate for this. Help us make a case for introverted intuition and how you believe it could be used the best. Come over to personality.com, leave a comment, ask a question, or just share your story directly below this podcast. We want to hear from you.
Can I make a slight correction on something that you said?
Yeah,
what I said.
Okay.
I like the TI.
I'm not trying to call you out. It's just that you said it quite a few times in the podcast, and every time you say the podcast, how weird it is. You say introverted introverted intuition. And introverted intuitive could be any of the IN types, including INTs.
Correct. You're absolutely right. That could be definitely misunderstood.
Alright. I don't know if people understand.
No, I hate details.
I know.
Because it slows me down, and I embarrass myself often because of it.
I don't think it's embarrassing.
I'm not embarrassed now.
No,
I have embarrassed myself often because of it.
I have done similar things. Alright, so I just wanted to make a clarification for you, the listener. Introverted intuitive could be any of the IN types, including INTs, which do not use introverted intuition.
Absolutely.
And every time Joel said that, just put in the phrase introverted intuition, which Joel intended to say, and then it's all right.
Yeah.
Am I an asshole?
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
And then you're supposed to say something else after I gave the website.
Right. I'm supposed to say, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, that's incredibly helpful. And of course, we have a book, which we established on the last podcast, that you need 11 copies of. You need 10 copies. You need 11 copies for the zombie apocalypse. You need 10 copies to keep you warm, because you're going to need it as fuel for fire, because they're 450-page books, so you're going to need all those pages. And then you're going to need the 11th copy in order to help rebuild civilization.
See, we did expand upon this last time. We said you can also hide things in these.
Yes.
So you may not have to burn all 10. You could use a few to like hide a flask in, hide something else in your middle. I don't know.
You mean like right now, not in the zombie apocalypse, but
Or even during the zombie apocalypse. Like, what happens if you have to, like, I don't know, hide medicine or something?
Totally true.
Because in the zombie apocalypse, you don't have to just worry about the zombies.
The factions.
You have to worry about people coming and stealing your stuff
That is true.
that are trying to also survive against the zombies. You actually have two fronts you're fighting.
And then as civilization is being rebuilt, of course there are going to be the power markers that come in.
Absolutely.
And then you're going to have to smuggle things to other people in your faction that might be across enemy lines.
And know how to then socially work with all the power functions to help rebuild society. To know how it's all going to work.
Which is why you need them. Yeah, so you need that 11 copies.
So 11 copies of the Personality Hacker book. You can get that at booksellers everywhere, and you need to do that right now before the zombie apocalypse hits.
Yeah,
Because it's going to be too late once Amazon shut down.
That's right. Yeah, you need to be prepared.
Yeah. So, and then you know, if you get them in the zombie apocalypse doesn't hit as soon as we expect it to, you could give them as gifts. I mean, I'm sure you have 10 friends or family members that would love to also prepare for the zombie apocalypse.
10 copies for everybody.
I was saying one copy from the 10 you bought. But yeah, if you want to buy each of your friends and family 10 copies in case they need them for fuel, hiding things, and rebuilding society, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all.
How soon do you think it's going to happen?
Any day now. It's imminent. Imminent.
Okay, so get your 250 copies now.
All right, my name is Joe Markowitz,
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
and we will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast. Welcome to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Markowitz.
And I'm Antonia Dodge, and we're going to continue our series of podcasts on the subject of intuition. Last week's podcast was on defining intuition as we use it in the personality psychology tools that we are familiar with, in particular with Myers-Briggs, which borrows from the work of Carl Jung. We defined intuition as effectively advanced pattern recognition.
Yeah.
It's generally it's a learning style where people feel comfortable asking the question, what if? They feel comfortable basically speculating and being willing to, follow the train of thought of what's going on behind the curtain.
Feel free to listen to this podcast and get from it what we're going to talk about. But if you haven't listened to the last one, it might make more sense to go back and do that, because it's going to give a lot of context to what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, we're going to be building on the previous podcast, and next week we'll continue on with this series on intuition, because we really want to address a segment of the population that we have a feeling is kind of ignored. And we went down that rabbit hole a bit in the last podcast, that there's a segment of the population, about 25%, that use intuition as their primary way of learning and understanding the world. And because they're only 25% of the population, even though it's 1 in 4, they're definitely not the majority, and so the world is not designed for them. And so what we wanted to do in this podcast is talk a little bit about the two styles of intuition that people use, the two specific learning styles of intuition. Because if you look at intuition, it actually gets broken down into two modalities. And which modality you're using changes the flavor of that intuition substantially.
I want to just stop here for 1 second and tell a story. I don't want to get into the actual data. But when we talk about the segment of the population that's represented as intuitive learning style, like we talked about in the last episode of our podcast, 25% of us are intuitive learning style, and 75% of us use it as a sensory learning style, of the population.
And just to add some context there, the sensory learning style are people who aren't as comfortable speculating.
Correct.
They are far more reliant on things being verifiable, observable. They want information to be more safe or secure, verifiable, reliable. And it's intuitives that are willing to take that leap, sort of that pattern recognition leap and basically go, I think I know what's going on here, even if they don't have completely verifiable information on it.
So I was kind of in a discussion with someone I grew up with recently.
A kerfuffle.
A discussion. It was just kind of there were some misunderstandings. There were some, you go through life and you always have a little bit of conflict that comes up. Anyway, I was in this conflict with this person, and he said to me, listen, one of the things that's so frustrating about you, Joel, is you show up when you're hanging out with me and some other people that you know, and you can't just sit down and talk about normal stuff. You can't just sit down and talk about your job, talk about the family, talk about the weather, talk about sports. You gotta talk about weird stuff. You gotta talk about things that are just they don't make any sense. He didn't use the word speculative, but basically he was trying to say it's speculative type stuff that it's not reliable. And he got to the point where he's trying to express this to me. I'm like, well, I guess it's just stuff I'm interested in. He says, what? Listen, why can't you just be normal? Why are you so weird?
Why are you so weird?
And I said, I guess I'm wired different. I'm a weird person. I like weird things. I'm into weird stuff. And he wasn't at the level where I could explain to him about intuition. But if I was able to, I'd let him know that, look, this is how my brain learns information. I do use my 5 senses. I do absorb the real world around me, but I also make leaps in logic. All of us people that use intuition will make speculative leaps. We want to look behind the curtain and see kind of the patterns of what's happening.
What's fascinating about that is that it wasn't just baffling to him, it was frustrating to him.
He was actually angry about it.
Right.
He was actually angry that I couldn't be normal. Or in his definition, normal. Just talking about normal stuff. I show up and I'm saying weird stuff, and it's like, it's distasteful. It's difficult. He and I we get along, obviously, and stuff like that, but this was a frustration for him, showing up to different events and functions where he's at, and I can't just be a normal person.
Right, and what's so fascinating about that, or not what's fascinating, what might even actually be called tragic about that, is for people who are listening to these podcasts and identify with what we've been talking about with intuition.
Yeah.
This might not be an isolated event for intuitives. They might actually have people in their lives, family members, friends, teachers, people who have influenced them, people they're influencing, who are actually upset because the intuitive person is wired different, and this other person can't understand that. They can't relate to it, they can't, and everybody else seems to be on the side of perhaps, the censor. So why does this intuitive have to be so weird? I actually know of an intuitive whose parents took him to a psychologist, and they said, fix this kid, he needs to be fixed. And the psychologist was an intuitive themselves, and after a bit of time, they looked at the parents and went, well, there's nothing really wrong with the kid. The kid is just, basically the psychologist was trying to explain the kid is wired different. And the kid's grandfather, who was also there, stood up and said, this kid is broken and you need to fix him. And I find it so kind of horrifying that we don't have enough information in our public consciousness to be able to explain away why somebody, your child, a friend, a family member, might be seeing the world profoundly differently than you are, and that doesn't mean they're broken.
Yeah.
So I think a big part of what we do at Personality Hacker, a big part of our personal mission, is to not, our first stated mission is to give everybody permission to be themselves. But the second part is we really love to get into the public consciousness, this idea that there are different learning styles, there's different modalities of interacting with the world. And we don't have to be an expert, we don't have to be a master of all this information. We just have to hold space for the idea that there might be some differences, like profound differences, the kind where you don't really understand where the person's coming from, you don't get it.
Yeah.
This, where you're like, hey, why can't you just talk about sports in your job, right? There's a little bit of room there for the person to say, look, I don't get how you're thinking. I don't get why you think the way that you do. But I bet you're one of those intuitives that I've heard so little about or so much about, right? Like, just to be able to open up some space. So one of the things we want to do in this series of podcasts is explain the different styles of intuition, just to give some context for how it works, how it looks in different people, and even amongst intuitives, to understand that there's actually, it's not just being intuitive, that there's different styles and different approaches to intuition. So if you run into somebody else who you think is intuitive, but they're going about it really differently than you are, it's because they are probably going about it differently than you are. And we wanted to give a little context to that.
And just remember, and we mentioned this last time, everyone has intuition as part of their learning process. In other words, everyone uses intuition to some degree.
Yeah, everybody can access it.
Exactly. But what we're talking about are people that use this as a primary, a preferenced way of learning in the world. So these are people that are using this as their primary way of learning. And everyone has access to this, but obviously people that use this as their primary way and have a preference for this are going to be better at it because they're using it more often. And so we call those people intuitives. It's not that not everyone can access intuition. It's just that these are the people that are accessing it as a preference on a regular basis. That's why we call them intuitives. It's like a name we've given it. But that's why, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Just like with any muscle, the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. And intuition is like a mental muscle. It does the same thing.
So let's get into breaking down the two types of intuition.
Okay, so this is going to get a little data heavy, but effectively, what we're talking about with intuition, it goes back to the Myers-Briggs system, and then the Myers-Briggs system harkens back to the work of Carl Jung. And intuition, like we've been talking about, is a learning style. It's a way of understanding reality, taking in new information, trying to figure out the world around you. And the reason why we want to describe it as a learning style is we want to contrast that with, say, a decision-making style or mental process. Because decision-making evaluates information. It makes judgment calls. When it gets a piece of information in, it goes, what am I supposed to do with this? Right? Like, what is the action I should be taking, or how should I be thinking about it? A learning style doesn't do that. It's more open. It's more about just trying to figure out how things work. And so intuition isn't judgmental. It's not making final calls. It's not deciding the value of something. It's just really trying to get it. It's trying to understand it. Now, if you're an intuitive, which means that you lead with a learning style of one of the styles of intuition, which we're about to talk about, and you feel like you do make judgment calls based on information, it's because you also have mental processes that are making judgment calls, right, are evaluating and decision-making. And all of these mental processes are so grafted together, they're all sort of intertwined, that they sometimes feel like the same thing. And that's why it's not entirely accurate to describe them as if they're in a vacuum, because all these mental processes that we use are kind of all blended together, and they work in such synchronicity that it's hard to figure out where one starts and the other stops. But that said, we're going to pretend like intuition is in a vacuum, and we're just going to describe these two styles of intuition as if nothing else influences them. But inside you, your intuition is working in conjunction with your mind's ability to evaluate the information it takes in. All by itself, though, intuition is totally non-judgmental. It's just a way to learn. So the two styles of intuition are pretty easy to figure out. One goes inward. It's called introverted intuition. And the other style of intuition is outwardly focused. It's called extroverted intuition. And then if you go to our website, we have a system that we call the Genius Style System or assessment, and it's built largely on the Myers-Briggs system. And so what we've done is, in order to make this more easy to understand or more accessible, we've given each of these styles of intuition a nickname that we feel really encapsulates what the learning process does. And so from this point on, we're going to refer to these styles of intuition by their nicknames. Yeah. So the introverted intuitive style, we've given that nickname perspectives. And the reason why we gave it the nickname of perspectives is that's effectively what it does. It, on some level, is not married to its own perspective. So when people are using this perspectives process, they're a little divorced from their own perspective. That gives them the ability to watch their own mind form patterns. It's a very interesting ability. If you're watching your mind form patterns, eventually over time, you're going to get the pattern of the patterns. You're going to kind of understand how brains or minds form patterns at all, right? Like you're just going to kind of get that. So perspectives people, when they hear other people talk or take an action or do something, their mind will sort of shift out of their own perspective and shift into the other person's perspective and get a sense of what's going on with this other person. And so what they end up being able to do feels like mind reading. It feels like, because they get a little sense of what's going on for the other person. And as soon as they get that sense, they go, I bet this is the pattern that's been created in the other person's unconscious mind. I bet this is what they're thinking. And so a lot of times perspectives users will have a conversation with somebody and they'll basically tell this other person what happened in their life or what they're thinking or their experience in a way that really weirds the other person out because it feels like this person just read their mind.
Yeah, we were actually at dinner last night with a friend of ours, Melanie, and she uses this perspectives process as a learning process. And we were talking about a third party and kind of a situation, and she basically said, I think this is probably what's going on for this person. And it was almost like she had shifted into their mind. And I was sitting there thinking, I think you might be right. I hadn't thought of it this way. And she gave me this perspective of what this person's probably experiencing and what they're thinking or feeling in the experience. I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course they would feel that in that situation, whatever the situation was we were talking about. Yeah, I can see totally what you're saying. And she was able to do that just like, boom. Like it was part of her genius. Like she can just perspective so easily because this is a talent of hers. This is a preference of hers.
Yeah, it feels very instinctive. And
it felt weird. It felt like she was like, wow, how did you do that? Like it feels like magic almost.
Yeah, well, and perspectives users oftentimes don't reveal this form of genius. And the reason why is because it can weird other people out. Like, they'll think you have ESP, or they'll think that you've been reading their private diary, or whatever. And so oftentimes the person will look at the perspectives user and go, how did you know that? And the problem is that because perspectives is working so unconsciously, the perspectives user will say, I don't know how I know that, I just know. The other thing that perspectives does is it gives the person who's using it the ability to forecast way into the future. They're very good at understanding implications and understanding where something's headed. They almost have the ability to truly predict future events. So this might feel woo-woo. To anybody who's using perspectives, you know exactly what we're talking about, and it doesn't feel woo-woo, it just feels like it's happening to you. And And I know a lot of people who are, quite skeptical, who are not into woo-woo stuff at all, who use perspectives. And they just see it as prediction ability. They just see it as the ability to forecast into the future. A lot of the great sci-fi writers of the past have been perspectives users because they're able to kind of see how things are going to pan out. And so they've been able to say, well, this is the kind of technology we're going to be using in the future. I always think of like Star Trek, where they were carrying around these like sort of little flat, it looked like clipboards, and like touching the clipboards in order to access information like that was a computer.
Exactly.
Like back in the early 90s, remember that?
Yeah.
And like right now, that is technology we're all commonly using, right? We're using touchscreen pads on, our tablets, and that's just every day. I mean, we take it for granted, and it's been like, 5 years since we started using that technology? And yet, whoever thought that piece up in the Gene Roddenberry, world of Star Trek, whoever was the person who decided that was something that people in the future would be using was totally spot on. That's what we use. We use tablets that have touchscreen. So it's kind of that ability. It's the ability to see what's coming down the pike. It's the ability to kind of forecast into the future what's going to be happening.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we can see this also. Perspectives people are able to see large groups of people and how social movements will happen as well. So, I can see this technology now, like an iPad, how people are using this. It's probably going to cause this chain reaction and a culture shift in this way. And you're like, and then sure enough, a couple years from there, boom, this happens. A culture shift happens. And they were right, because they can kind of see how people are going to thinking about what they're thinking about.
Right.
It's like this weird level thing.
Yeah.
Now, neither one of us have perspectives.
I was just about to say that.
Intuition. So it is like magic to both of us too, because we don't use this process primarily as our learning style.
We're both intuitives, but we're not perspectives users. So whenever I get around a perspectives person, I'm just like, are you a wizard? Because it feels like such incredible, it feels like an incredible ability. Now, one more thing I want to mention about perspectives users is that because they're able to understand how minds form patterns, one thing they have an instinctive grasp on is that the picture in my head when somebody says a word is different than the picture in your head. Now, the reason why this is unusual is that most people don't even realize they're doing this, but they assume that when you use a word, the exact same picture is showing up in your head as it is in mine. And that's not reality. Let's use a really concrete example. Let's use the word teacup, okay? When I say the word teacup and you have a picture that comes up in your head, it is not the same picture that's coming up in my head, right? Like, I'm thinking of a different teacup than you are. You might be thinking of the first teacup you ever saw, or one that you thought was particularly beautiful, or a conglomeration of all the teacups that you've ever seen.
I'm thinking of Piper's little plastic teacups right now.
Right, right. And I'm thinking of a delicate, beautiful China porcelain teacup that I saw recently. So we just have different images in our head. Now, it's really interesting, but if you really think about it, most people don't even question that. When I say teacup, same picture's happening for both of us. Now, when it comes to something concrete like an object, like a teacup, because the object is so concrete, generally whatever it is, it's like a small bowl that holds, hot, strained tea, water, right? Like, basically teacup, we can both agree on that, and whatever picture's coming up for us is probably that. Like, its functionality is coming up for both of us. So we don't even think about, like, I don't have to describe the one that's in my head when I use the word just to make sure that we're on the same page. However, when you start using really abstract words like loyalty or love or integrity or fastidiousness, like anything that's an abstract word that doesn't have an immediate concrete association, now the two pictures in our head become very important because we might not actually be seeing the same image at all. And a lot of arguments are based on two people using the same word that have two totally different meanings for that word. And a perspectives person, because they understand how people think and they recognize how patterns form in others' minds, are first of all, the masters of metaphor. And second of all, they're usually pretty good at conflict resolution because they'll be seeing two people in an argument and they'll go, whoa, guys, I think you guys are using two different words to say the same thing. You actually agree. Or they'll say, I actually think that you guys are using the same words for two different pictures, right? Like, this is actually what's going on. And other people will look at them and go, whoa, how did you figure that out? It's part of the gift. It's part of the perspective's gift to be able to understand that different pictures come up in different people's minds for different words.
Yeah, and it's the true power of how perspectives can facilitate reconciliation or understanding between parties and all these different types of things. A couple other things to mention about perspectives that I've noticed is perspectives, the process of learning with perspectives is it first of all takes, I believe, from my perspective, it takes a little bit of time sometimes. It takes some time to develop. Often, like our friend, we have a mutual friend who has a perspectives learning style, and oftentimes you'll feed him a problem, and that problem will sit and bang around in his unconscious for several days, and then he'll come out and say, hey, I got the answer to the problem you gave me. And it's a brilliant answer, but it took a while to go through the process of getting to, like, he had to, like, really think about it for a while before he could come up with some solutions. It's not like a real-time, access. It's got to kind of percolate in there. It's like a slow simmer. So that's one thing I've noticed about perspective. The other thing is perspectives, if you have this perspective learning style, it's very easy to be distracted. Your mind, it's almost like it's a fragile process sometimes because you have to really keep focus and your mind is in there doing what it's doing, and if you're distracted or if there's a lot of sensory input, if there's a lot, and we can explain that on another podcast why it is, but this is what happens. You can get distracted, you get off track, and it's hard to stay focused when you're using this process because it's a fragile process. So it takes some time. It's fragile. These are two things I've noticed with perspectives, and you might have some other things you've noticed as well. But those are two primary things I've noticed. If you're a perspectives person, that's not bad. That's normal for you. This is normal stuff. It's easy to be distracted, and it takes some time. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the metaphor of the bloodhound on the trail in a maze.
Yeah.
If the bloodhound loses the scent, it might never be able to pick it back up. And when a perspectives person is working on a problem, that's kind of how it's working. Like, sometimes when they come up with a solution, they can't even tell you how they got there. They just let their mind go. And their mind just led them to the solution, which is pretty incredible. However, if they get distracted while they're working on that problem, or if they get, sort of thrown off course, they might never be able to pick up the trail again. So they tend to be very sensitive to distractions. You can see them do lots of things like sort of order their workroom or rearrange it in a way where their back is to a wall and they can see the door in order to see any distractions, entering. They'll unconsciously look for the place in like a restaurant where their back is to a wall, and they do this just because distractions are so jarring that they want to make sure that they can see them coming. And if you're a perspectives user, if what we're talking about, you're like, oh my gosh, I've never had anybody describe this, the way I think so clearly, and you're not doing this, if your back is, like if you work in a cubicle and your back is to the opening of the cubicle, see if you can get it moved around. The quality of your work will improve by a significant percentage if you can just turn your back to a wall and watch the entrance. And it's not even like you're watching the entrance all the time. You just know that you're going to be able to see a distraction coming. And that part of the mental real estate that you're allocating to not being jarred by distractions can now be reallocated to the work that that you're working on. So it's actually a pretty high leverage hack for people who use perspectives. One thing I wanted to mention about perspectives before we move on to the second style of intuition is that perspectives is only used by 10% of the population. So, we said approximately 25, sometimes some statistics say as much as 30% of the population uses intuition as their primary learning style.
As more of us mate, it will go up higher, I think. So two of us find each other and make babies.
And get it on. Yeah, entirely. Well, and you can see sort of like the rise of the creative class. You can really see intuitives coming out of the woodwork. And so, who knows what the actual real statistics are. Usually 25 to 30% is what gets bandied about. That said, of that 25, up to 30%, but it's probably close to 25, only 10% are using perspectives. More are using the second form of intuition, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And my theory, I don't know this to be true, but I've been working with this information for a long time, so I've been coming up with a few theories. And my theory is that perspectives is one of the last of the cognitive functions to have evolved. I think it's new. I think it's new technology, which is why it feels really woo-woo. Like, it feels like ESP, or it feels like mind reading, or forecasting, or telling the future. This was the mental process that the shamans of old tribes were using, all the way up to, like I said, some of the greatest sci-fi writers of all time were perspectives users. And so it feels like this incredible process that nobody quite understands. And I think it's because it's new. I think it's a new technology on the scene. I wouldn't be surprised if it had only evolved in the last, 15 to 20,000 years.
Yeah.
And so since that's the case, and when I say 15 to 20,000 years, that might not seem like that long ago, but some of the earlier mental processes probably evolved like 200,000 years ago, or even further back than that. So this is pretty new technology, and for those of you who use it, it's tough to find mentors. It's tough to find people who can train you to use this process. It's difficult to find other people who even get it and won't be weirded out, right? Like, you can even communicate with other people about it. So, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that it's funny you say that, because we actually have, just taking the profiles, like the tip of the iceberg, we actually have a full training program to teach people how to go through profiling, like learning all the system that we teach, and then not only learn it, but then be able to sit down with somebody and ask them questions and talk with them and determine their personality type and help them, coach them and all this stuff. So we've got lots of students that have gone through our really high-level trainings, and we started a call for people that use this process once a month that get together in a community to talk about it, because you're right, it is a hard place to find mentors for it. And so these perspectives people come together and they get to talk about perspectives issues with each other and some of the challenges and some of the things they go through. And it's been a great, almost like support group for people that use this mental. It's kind of weird to say that, but it really is, because there's oftentimes, if you have this as a learning style, you probably have the experience of being misunderstood and just not understood on a regular basis, because you just think so differently than the rest of the world.
Perspectives people tend to have a lot of one-sided relationships.
Yeah.
Because they understand the other person way more than that person understands them. And so they have very unique needs and very unique challenges. And so the Perspectives Call that we set up in that community has, it's basically to go, okay, so what are the very unique needs that you want to talk about, this month? Because you can't find anybody else to talk about this with. And it's something that I believe perspectives people are extremely powerful. I think they're a powerful force in the world. But because they don't get very much support, and because they don't really have a lot of people that understand how it works, it's difficult for them to rise up to become the best version of themselves, because they're just trying to get by. They're just trying to deal with these weird challenges that nobody else can even understand, much less give them advice on how to get to the next level. So I think they have a really unique time of it, and I also think that they're birds of paradise. They're amazing in their abilities. So if you are a Perspectives user, then know that you're very special, and that there are at least 2 people on the planet who kind of get how you think. So the second style. Oh, did you want to say anything?
No, I'm good. Let's get into the extroverted intuition now.
Yeah. So the other style of intuition goes outward, and its technical name is extroverted intuition. However, the nickname that we've given it in the Genius system is exploration, because we feel that the word exploration really encapsulates how this process works. Now, Joel and I are both exploration users, and that's part of the reason why we're really attracted to each other, because we love we love that the other person can really understand us and get us, and that we enjoy doing the same activities. Now, unlike Perspectives, which is an inward process, requires a lot of thought, is very Yeah, like it's slow paced. It's more exploratory inward. It's exploring the inner mind. Exploration, on the other hand, is more about exploring the world. It's about understanding patterns, not inside our heads, but actually patterns in the outside world. How do things work, right? Like, why is it that this thing works the way that it does? What if I push this button? What if I pulled this switch, right? Like, what if I push this person? What would they do? And so exploration tends to be very test iterate. It tends to be very interactive. It's really about engagement, and it's very much about getting the world to reveal itself to you through your interaction with it. So exploration people have a couple of really cool things that they're able to do. The first one is that they're able to understand the connections and relationships to things that other people don't understand. They see how things are interrelated. Because they pushed a button over here one time, and then weirdly enough, 10 steps down the line, this thing responded and reacted. They start to understand how systems work, right? Like, it's not just a matter of pushing this button and then this thing happens. It's a matter of pushing this button, and this thing happens, and then this thing over here happens, and then this thing responds to it, and then this emerges, right? It's really about understanding how the world around us is sort of functioning. One of the metaphors that I've tried to use to explain how our minds work is because
it's hopeless.
It's really kind of difficult, but it's kind of like a web, a spider's web. Now, every fly that flies into the spider's web, the spider knows the location of that fly. But the spider also knows the relationship between each of the flies that have flown into the web to each other. So it's not like I just know where fly A is. I know where fly A is in relationship to fly B and fly C. And that's how information comes at exploration people. It just kind of all flies into us, right? And we understand the relationship between this thing and this thing, even if it feels like it's totally not related. And so exploration people just get in the habit of thinking in that way. One of the exercises that I've heard another colleague of ours, Dario Marti, tried to explain how he knows when an exploration person is he'll grab two objects off of a table, like a salt shaker and a package of salt, a salt shaker. I just said salt. A salt shaker and ketchup. Those two things are not usually related. Or maybe like a fork and a salt shaker.
Yeah.
And he'll look at the person and say, okay, these two things are married. Which one's a man and which one's a woman? Most people will take a moment to try to figure out what you're talking about, right? Like, why would you ask me, first of all, what do you mean they're married? And second of all, what do you mean which one's the man, which one's the woman? Like, why would these two things be married and why would one be male and one be female? And then if you push, they go, well, I guess the fork is the female and the salt is the male, or whatever. They'll have some reason. You ask an exploration person that, they won't even blink. They'll instantly have an answer for you.
Absolutely.
And they won't even question why you ask them, because that seems like a totally reasonable question to them. Because that's how they see reality, right?
Yeah.
Well, of course the fork and the salt shaker are married. Of course one's a man and one's a woman. That's how it is, right?
Yeah.
And so exploration people just get in a habit of thinking in these interrelated, interconnected ways.
Yeah, and I would guess that a lot of exploration people have like 20 books going at one time of all sorts of different disciplines and different, areas of whatever. And oftentimes, like, for example, in my life, like, I'll be working on a business problem or something, and I'll be reading something about an art book or comedy, and I'll get an idea for business based on something I read in a comedy book, a comedy writing book or something like this, because my mind is constantly trying to make connections between things that actually don't have connections. So basically what's going on. So I'm reading a comedy book and I'm like, what connections in here are related to... It's not even conscious, it's just happening as I'm reading. Oh, I see how they're doing this. I bet I could use that to write sales copy for our business over here because that's a humorous way of turning this phrase. And then you make this connection all of a sudden. It just, boom, it pops in your head because you're bringing in data from different places. It's happening very rapidly oftentimes.
Yeah, it's really creative. I think the reason why we naturally want to make connections between two unrelated things is because that makes a brand new thing in the world.
Yeah.
Something the world has never seen if you can connect two objects that have never been connected before. So there's a real joy in the creative process.
Have you ever seen the television show House? Dr. House uses this mental process to learn information. He's an exploration person. That's his personality type. And you'll notice in the show, usually about after the third or fourth commercial break, about 10 to 12 minutes before the end of the show, he's got this big problem he's trying to solve. And they've tried everything. They've tried all the typical medical whatever. And he'll be sitting in his office bouncing a ball against the wall, just racking his brain trying to figure this out. And someone walks in and says something about his apartment, is going to be having to be cleaned because he's got termites or something. And because they said something about termites, it made him think about something else, and all of a sudden now he's got the answer to the problem. And you're like, if you don't use this process, you're like, how in the world did he make a connection between termites in his apartment to this cancer this person has? And now he knows the solution to solve it, but that's how his brain's working, because he's getting these disparate pieces of information, he's making connections. And somehow that made a spark in his mind that said, aha, I've got the solution. And usually it's the right solution. The show ends on a happy note or whatever. but that's an example.
Not happy.
Or he solves the problem.
Right.
Let's go that way. He's not a happy guy. But that's a typical example. If you watch this show, you'd see this play out usually in the show almost every single episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And so exploration has a tendency to be all about novelty. It loves new. It loves these new connections that can be made. It loves that if you mix termites and cancer, you come up with this whole new way to explain something, or this whole new answer to a problem. And so novelty becomes the catchword for exploration people. And because they love novelty, they're usually very inventive. And they're usually mavens. They are the first. They love to be the first. I've explained exploration to others as having a machete in your hand and there's 6 foot tall grass in front of you, and you have absolutely no fear about just entering that grass. Like, you're just gonna blaze a trail and cut it, and lions and tigers be damned. If you run into one, you'll figure it out when you get there. But you have to. There's a compulsion in you to chart new territory. So the people who were the first to come up with the idea of getting to the moon, right? They're like, no, let's go on the moon. Like, we can do this. I know we can. And then a great example of an exploration person is, a lot of the great scientists, not just sci-fi writers, but the great scientists have been exploration people. Albert Einstein used exploration. Neil deGrasse Tyson is probably exploration. Bill Nye the Science Guy is definitely exploration. Richard Feynman was an exploration user. So we see him over in the sciences. And then if you look at the world's great comedians...
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Well, and this is something...
A lot of them are, too.
It can look frenetic sometimes because it's so crazy. And Robin Williams is someone who uses this process. And if you ever watch his stand-up, he's all over the place. And he's making so many rapid connections in real time that you're like, I can't even... You're like, I mean, I can follow him because I'm an hipster, but some people are like, where's he going with this? This is insane.
Yeah.
And it looks like insanity sometimes because it's so frenetic and so quick and so rapid, and those connections are just firing and firing. And it seems like it even gets faster the faster he goes.
Yeah. And so there's exploration it's really about new connections. So to contrast these two then, and exploration, probably looking through the lens of evolution, it probably evolved before perspectives, but it was probably one of the last to evolve. But making those connections, you can see, becomes really important in trying to push humanity to the next level. Without the exploration process, humanity would stagnate. And that's why exploration is so fantastic. So if you look at these two intuitive processes, perspectives and exploration, they look quite different from each other. Exploration is very real-time kinetic. It's all about figuring things out right in the moment. It's very test iterate. It's very push the boundaries. It's willing to be obnoxious. It's willing to fail in order to get the answer it's looking for. Ultimately, exploration is asking what if. It's looking for the possibilities. It wants to know what if. Perspectives, on the other hand, is not real-time kinetic. It's post-processing. It's long timelines. It's digesting the information. It's seeing the implications. It's looking at it from all different perspectives. And it's not asking what if, it's asking why. So one person described the two, I thought, very, very beautifully. They said if exploration is about thinking outside the box, perspectives is about thinking about the box.
Yeah. The other thing is, and if you remember from the last podcast, we talked about intuition being particularly interested in not necessarily the sensory data or the reliable data. It's interested in speed of information and depth of insight. And both types of intuition do this. However, it seems like exploration likes the speed of information and perspectives likes the depth of insight into that information. So you tend to see a little bit of polarization there between those two. Now both like both of those things, but typically I think perspectives goes toward more of the depth, and I think exploration goes more towards the speed.
Definitely. They're very compatible, by the way. When you marry these two styles of intuition together, that's usually when you get some of the greatest business partnerships ever. You get really great marriages. You get really great partnerships in general. Now, that doesn't mean if you're one style of intuition, you have to be looking for somebody of the other style. You can be very happy, very successful, etc. with somebody of your own style, or even somebody who's non-intuitive. However, when you get the two together, they're a very powerful, they're a power pair. They're a powerful combination. So one of the great things about understanding these two styles of intuition is recognizing, number one, that you're not alone, right? Like we're taught, the reason we're able to break down these two styles is because you're one of a series of people who share this process, right? It's something that's been able to be observable to a point where we can describe them, and we might be describing you in sort of an eerily accurate way, and it's because you're part of a group of people who think like that. You're not alone. So that's first and foremost. You are not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You actually are a part of a small group of people that think in a very radically different way, but that the world needs, right? The world needs both styles of intuition. You could see why both of them would be very, very important for getting us to the next level. Without these styles of intuition, we would absolutely stagnate.
And when you realize this about yourself, we've actually called it an awakening, an intuitive awakening, where you are realizing, oh, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not just a weirdo. This is actually how my brain is hardwired. And you awaken to this knowledge. You have this intuitive awakening of, wow, people actually have language for this. They have tools and processes that I can use to develop my intuition even further. Embrace it, find like minds, and continue forward in my development based on this new information. What an amazing feeling that is, because I've gone through it. Having this awakening experience.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, the world really needs you to be showing up as an intuitive.
Absolutely.
Because there's not that many. 1 in 4 it feels like, that feels like a significant percentage of the population. But just like we talked about last time, 1 in 4 people are left-handed. And if you're a right-hander, do you ever think about left-handed people ever?
I don't.
I don't.
Sorry, left-handers.
I know, and it's not like I think that they should be marginalized or killed or anything, like people have sometimes thought in the past. They're sinister, left-handed people. It's not that they're wrong or anything, I just don't think about them. They're not part of my daily experience. And that's how the world thinks about intuitives, right? Until intuitives rise up. Until they take a position of leadership, and then all of a sudden they're shooting stars. Name a lot of the major leaders of the world, and they're using a different style of intuition.
I've noticed that people actually like intuition, but they don't like it with them. Like, if you're an intuitive and you're around people who use a different style, a sensory learning style, they might get annoyed, like the person I was talking to at the very beginning of the podcast, where I can't just be normal. But probably that same person that thinks I'm a weirdo goes home in the evening after work and watches television program with the main character
being intuitive,
as an intuitive learning style. And they love it because, like the different shows that are using this process to figure problems out or to solve mysteries or to solve medical mysteries or whatever. They're using intuition to do that, and people love watching that. But once you're in a real daily life experience, now the stuff's getting really real, and it's really present with them, and it's like, I don't know if I want this person that weird around me. I just like them on TV. Get them away from me.
Right, so there's a really weird message that gets sent to intuitives. That, you might really connect with somebody on a program or a fantastic character in a book that, or a movie or whatever, that you think, man, I think just like this person, why am I the pariah? And yeah, it's a really confused message that gets sent to intuitives that we love you in fiction, but we hate you in reality. Or not hate you, but just don't really, we don't really appreciate you in reality. The truth is, though, start naming some of the major movers and shakers in the world. Oprah Winfrey, Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, some of the major, movers and shakers in Hollywood, and
President Obama.
Right, like, there's a lot of people on the planet who are in massively powerful positions, who alter how we think, who are all intuitives, that gave themselves permission to be intuitive. That's all they did. All they did was give themselves permission to completely step into their greatest strengths and their greatest genius. And that's really the message we want to give to intuitives. I know there's probably been some mixed messages sent to you. I know you probably kind of maybe have felt like odd man out sometimes, maybe growing up, maybe in the family you were raised in. The truth is, though, the more you step into permission, first of all, giving yourself permission to be intuitive, and then figuring out skills and tools to make that intuition more powerful and strong, and then finding a way that you can make a big impact in the world, you could be truly unstoppable. You could do amazing things for the world. So we really would love for you to feel awakened. We would love for you to feel like you have permission to be yourself.
We've actually created a program around just this, and if you're interested in going down this road, it's obviously a great leverage point and a tool for you to use to be able to awaken your intuition, to be able to see how to use it, how to meet other people that are like-minded. And I'd just like to throw it out there. That's available on our website, personalityhacker.com, as it's actually called Intuitive Awakening. It's a program that deals specifically with this learning style. If you have it, and obviously you need to know if you're intuitive or not, so come over and take the assessment, take the test to find out if you are either perspectives or exploration. And if you're one of those, that means you're an intuitive. You learn through this process. And we want to be here for your journey. We're real excited to have you as a listener, and we want to stay in touch and keep going down this road with you together.
Yeah, and we'll continue on this series with intuition, talking a little bit about some of the things that intuitives deal with, some of the unique challenges that intuitives deal with, and maybe some tools on how to, get through those challenges. And the Intuitive Awakening program will be putting on a brand new one towards the end of the month. So keep your eye open for information on the brand new version, because we actually did an Intuitive Awakening program a couple of years ago, but we're going to be totally revamping it. So keep your eyes peeled for a little bit more information on that. But in the meantime, please feel free to go to the website and take the free version of the Genius Style Assessment and find out if you are a perspectives or an exploration user.
So that's personalityhacker.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/personalityhacker, twitter.com/personalityhack. And please subscribe to this podcast, tell your friends about it, and we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking, if you have any questions and all that. My name is Joel Markowitz.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We will talk to you next time.
Yes,